We're live streaming, Mr. Ross. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our special council meeting for March the 15th. Welcome to council, staff, and members of the public who are here with us this evening. There are two planning items being brought forward this evening for information and public consultation purposes only, with no decisions being made tonight. I would like to advise that this meeting is being live streamed and audio and video recorded and shall form part of the record, which will be retained in accordance to the town's retention bylaw. And for more information about the collection, please contact the clerk's office. I will now ask Councillor Drodge to provide our land acknowledgement statement.
The town of Innisfil acknowledges that the town of Innisfil is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history. The town also acknowledges that the land is in the traditional territories of the First Peoples of Turtle Island. It's shared between the Anishinaabe peoples of Beausoleil First Nation, Chippewas First Rama Nation, Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and we thank them for generations of stewardship. This meeting place is still the home of many Indigenous people, and as the settlers, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. The town acknowledges the forced sacrifices that are the foundation of Canadian society today. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit.
Thank you, Councillor Drodge. We'll now go to the approval of the agenda. And could I ask a mover and a seconder for a recommendation for Councillor Constantine, Councillor Zanella? All those in favor? That is carried. I'll now ask if there's any disclosures of interest, any conflict or pecuniary interest on either of the two items this evening. Seeing none, we'll go into our first meeting. Our first item this evening is a proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 1335 Killarney Beach Road in the town of Innisfil. We'll start by hearing from town staff and a consultant on behalf of the applicant for further planning context concerning the application. Council may have questions or comments, and then we will have an opportunity for public consultation. We will hear first from members of the public here at the council chambers, and then from anyone who wishes to speak virtually. All speakers will have 5 minutes to ask your questions or express your concerns. Then staff or a consultant will respond where possible. Any questions or concerns that cannot be responded to this evening will be addressed in a staff report that will come at a future time. Once everyone has had an opportunity, should anyone need to speak for a second time to identify an issue that has not already been raised or to receive clarification, they may be provided with an additional 5 minutes. After all members of the public have provided comment, council will receive all comments for information. Should any member of the public watching the live stream wish to make a comment, they can email Clerk's Services, and these comments will be provided to council and town staff and taken into consideration before council makes a final decision. You may also be added to the circulation list as an interested party, where you will be kept updated on any future information regarding the item. The email will be listed on the PowerPoint during the meeting and is also available on tonight's agenda that can be found on the town's webpage. We'll now hear from the town clerk, Ms. Thoma, on how the public notice of this meeting was provided.
Thank you, Your Worship. In accordance with the Planning Act, notice for this public meeting was provided to required agencies and circulated to all landowners within 120 meters of the subject lands on February 23, 2023. Corresponding signage was also posted on the property on February 23, 2023, and information and materials respecting the application were posted on the town's Get Involved page.
Thank you, Ms. Thoma. Has any correspondence been received by the Clerk's Department concerning the proposed amendments?
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, we received one email this evening dated March 15, 2023 from Kristen May expressing her concerns. As well, Your Worship, members of the public may comment or express their opinions up until council has made a decision by contacting the clerk's office.
Thanks, Ms. Toma. We'll now hear from Darren Ding, placemaker planner, who will provide a high-level summary of the planning context of the proposed amendment. Mr. Ding. Oh, Mr. Montgomery.
Just to clarify, Your Worship, it will be me making the presentation. Sorry about that.
No worries, whenever you're ready.
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of council, staff, and the public, the purpose of this public meeting is to consider an application by KLM Planning Partners on behalf of the owner, Ballymore Building Innisfil Corp., for an official plan amendment to the town's official plan and a zoning bylaw amendment to Town Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw number 8013. Slide, please. Can clerks advance the slides, or? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So the purpose of the official plan amendment is proposing to redesignate a portion of the subject lands from downtown commercial area, residential low density 1 and key natural heritage features and key hydrologic features to residential medium density. The zoning bylaw amendment is proposing to rezone the subject lands from mixed use 4 Lefroy exception H or MU42H zone to residential townhouse exception RTX zone. The official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment would allow a common element condominium townhouse development consisting of 60 units made up of 34 conventional townhouses with rear yards and also 26 back-to-back townhouses and also a private road and visitor parking area. Next slide. This aerial photo is from 2022 and shows the subject lands highlighted in yellow that the applicant proposed to rezone and redesignate for this townhouse project. Subject lands have frontage on Ardill Street, which is a recently dedicated municipal street to the municipality, along with Davis Loop. These were dedicated in the Elsemi P3 subdivision, which was just registered in November of 2022. 126 single detached homes are approved on Davis Loop, with frontage on Davis Loop, some of which back onto this proposed development to the south, as you can see. To the north of the subject lands are residential and commercial uses on Killarney Beach Road. To the west is the Metrolinx rail line, and on the east side is Ardill Street, and to the east of Ardill is a future conveyed municipal park. Next slide. So staff are reviewing this application in the context of applicable planning policies and plans, including the Provincial Policy Statement 2020, the Provincial Growth Plan 2020, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, the County of Simcoe Official Plan, the Innisfil Official Plan, and the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 8013. The staff report speaks to a brief review of these plans and bylaw in Attachment 5. Next slide. So in terms of comments received, the Simcoe County District School Board has stated no objections in their standard conditions. In-Services has stated no objection with various requirements to be provided at the detailed design stage. County of Simcoe has also stated no objection, but has some commentary on waste management and the requirements if waste was to be administered by the county versus if it was dealt with privately because of the private streets proposed. And also, as of today, Metrolinx has provided comments stating berming, fencing, and vegetative setback requirements from the rail line, as well as requirements for additional studies. We also have comments from a resident this evening with concerns about lack of childcare, the sidewalks in the area, school capacity, and a lack of commercial development in the core of Lefroy, and also concerns about postal delivery. Next slide, please. So the applicant will provide more details in their presentation, but essentially in summary, just to reiterate, this is a proposed mix of 3-story back-to-back and conventional townhouses in a common element condominium format, totaling 60 units. The overall density is about 55 units per net hectare. A 6-meter wide private common element condominium road and visitor parking area is proposed for the development, and the road would have 2 access points onto Ardill Street. Next slide. So there are no decisions on this application this evening, but in terms of next steps, staff will review and consider all of the comments received and report back to council at a future council meeting, recommending whether the proposed amendments should be approved. Notice would be provided respecting when the recommendation report is returned to council for consideration to all those who requested notification or submitted written correspondence for this public meeting, and to all those who requested notification on the getinvolved.ca website. The official plan amendment would be adopted by Town Council and then subsequently approved by the County of Simcoe, as is the case for all amendments currently to our official plan, and the zoning bylaw amendment would be directly approved by Council. Detailed site plan control for this file is also required, which is administered by staff, as well as a condominium exemption application and part lot control exemption applications, which would be used to create the townhouse lots, the roads, and to register a condo on the subject lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. We'll next hear from Keith McKinnon of KLM Planning Partners with further planning context for this application. Whenever you're ready, welcome, Mr. McKinnon.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, staff, members of the public. So as stated, my name is Keith McKinnon. I'm with KLM Planning Partners, Inc., here on behalf of Ballymore Building Innisfil Corp. Pleased to be here this evening. I guess, Madam Clerk, you're going to do the slides? Okay, great. So I will try not to reiterate what staff have already gone through in terms of their presentation. I think what I'll do is I'll just sort of focus more on the technical highlights of what our application is for. But as noted, the subject property is on the west side of Ardell, immediately south of Killarney Beach Road. It's approximately 1.2 hectares in size in totality, but the amendment itself is roughly just over a hectare in size, of which the parcel would be accommodated for. Next slide, please. So, understanding the new requirements under the Planning Act with Bill 23, obviously we have a few things that are no longer part of public meetings, one of which obviously is either plans of subdivision or plan of condominium. However, we felt it was important that for council and members of the public to understand ultimately what our applications are proposing to implement. We figured we would need to show you what our proposed site plan that we filed as part of our original applications before the municipality are for. So what you see here, as noted by Mr. Montgomery, is a total of 60 units. They are townhouse dwelling units. In the center, you can see that those are back-to-back townhouses, so that's a new product type. That's not typically found in the town currently today. So what that ultimately means is they don't have a traditional rear yard. Their amenity space is above a garage or otherwise. And then on the periphery, so the south and north side of the limits of the block are specifically general townhouse related. So they're all common element condominium. So what does that mean? So what that means is they're not on a public street. They're on a private condominium road. So ultimately there would be a condominium corporation that would be created, which will deal with things such as garbage pickup, snow removal, grass cutting of amenity spaces, maintenance of the road, maintenance of the underground services. So things that typically the town would normally take care of, and the county obviously as it comes to the garbage collection, they are not required, or you being the municipality is not required. That would be through a municipal corporation or a condo corporation, excuse me, that each of the units would ultimately provide funding towards and would be responsible for that work on their own. So there's no additional requirements for the municipality in terms of road maintenance and otherwise. Next slide, please. So as part of our applications, one of which is obviously an official plan amendment, the current subject designations, as you can see and highlighted in purple there, has a few different designations, some of which are carryovers that didn't get cleaned up when the draft plan of subdivision had gone through its original process. So part of it is the downtown commercial area designation, part of it is low density residential, which you can see in the little pocket of yellow, and then the last one is a key natural heritage feature and key hydrologic feature, which again is a carryover from what the official plan originally carried forward. But when the overall draft plan of subdivision went through the process, it effectively dealt with all those matters. So there when you look at the wording of key natural heritage feature and key hydrologic feature, you're wondering, well, is there an issue related environmentally for this lands? Which we could say is no, because that has all been addressed and studied and ultimately approved. That was done as part of the overall subdivision work. There are also a couple site-specific provisions that the town's current OP relates to these lands. One is section 11.2.11 and section 24.1. Both of those are proposed to be removed. So what one of the sections does is 24.1 sets out a minimum requirement of 25% of effectively additional units. So whether that be granny suites or accessory dwelling units. Obviously, Bill 23 has changed the landscape now as we deal with accessory dwelling units. But because these units will actually not have basements, the minimum requirement in your official plan is 25%. We actually have to reduce that to 20% because without having basements, we can effectively only provide accessory dwelling units on the flanking units, so those that are on the end. And then 11.2.1 sets out specific percentages as it relates to townhouse dwelling units versus singles and singles and semis. And of course, that obviously doesn't work in this situation where we have 100% townhouse dwelling units being proposed. So next slide, please. So those effectively are the policies that I just sort of went through in terms of the site-specific exceptions that we're looking to amend as part of our applications. So next slide, please. So the proposed zoning has a dual zoning currently in the town's zoning bylaw. The westerly quarter, I would say, is currently zoned as agricultural general, whereas the balance or easterly third is in the mixed-use Lefroy 4 site-specific, exception 2 zone category with the hold provision related to it. Our proposed zoning bylaw amendment application seeks to rezone those two zone categories to a residential townhouse site-specific zone that would deal specifically with the condominium nature related of these units, given that the town's current bylaw does not contemplate that currently. Next slide, please. The next two slides are just some very general and representative examples of potential house designs that may come as part of this development. Obviously, and as Mr. Montgomery noted, we already have applied for site plan approval. Again, exterior cladding and design now with Bill 23 is no longer applicable to be a part of site plan review, but we just thought for council and members of the public to get a general idea of what these townhouses could look like. We provided two representative examples. So this is the first one. Next slide, please. And this is the second one. So next slide, please. So as part of our applications, which one thing I should have noted is those were filed back in November 25th of last year, which were ultimately deemed complete in January of this year. We were required to provide a number of technical studies as part of our application in order for them to be deemed complete. You see a fairly significant list there of studies. I won't run through them all, but there are a number of them there. And for any member of the public that either might be here in person or listening online, if they have any interest, those studies are available through the town's website for review. Next slide, please. So with that, Your Worship, members of council and members of the public, that concludes my quick presentation, but certainly happy to answer any questions public or council may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Questions from members of council? We'll start with Councillor Saunders.
I'm just wondering if any of those townhouses or the area where the townhouses are going, is it going to be like accessible for disability people with our wheelchairs? We have larger trucks and, larger vans that bring in people that are in wheelchairs and are disabled people. Is there going to be room to be able to build something for them?
Good question. I don't know that that's one I can truly answer, only because it really comes down to a built form design in terms of what the builder is ultimately able to accommodate. Typically, though, most builders, if there is a purchaser that does require accessible needs, typically they are able to accommodate them.
Councillor Constantine?
Originally, this was supposed to be senior dwellings, and now it has been changed to townhouses. So my question is, why didn't the elderly citizen take an interest in this apartment? Was it due to affordability problem?
So through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Constantine. So a good question. So the existing draft approval, and just for way of background, the existing draft plan, the way it was draft approved, had a label on it as a seniors residential block on this parcel. So our client were not the original owners of when it was draft approved. They bought it out of receivership and proceeded accordingly afterwards. And they did reach out to 3 separate providers to see if there was an interest to provide a seniors housing accommodation on this block. And of all 3 of them that they had reached out to did not show an interest on this. So by virtue of that, our clients felt it was necessary to move forward with an alternative use being, in this particular instance, townhouses. But one thing I should also mention as well is that the zoning that is in force in effect today, without any potential change, allows for a variation of uses. So the seniors is only one of a number of uses that's currently permitted today, but townhouses, unfortunately, are not one of them.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I understand correctly, the original plan called for over 90 homes. Am I understanding that when you bought it out of receivership? Am I correct in that understanding?
So that's 89 was the original estimated number of units on this block.
So we reduced it by a third because of 3 conversations you had with particular business. Did you reach out to the town to see if alternative resources could be put into play? Because we have a growing senior population, and I'm pretty sure the town would have more than been able to assist you in finding somebody who would actually utilize the property in a more efficient manner for seniors.
So through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor Fowler. My understanding is that my client did not reach out to the town to look for some additional assistance. Given the nature of the building industry, they obviously have lots of contacts that do this type of work. This is not one of their fortes, hence the reason why they look to either a partner or sell it to those that do provide this type of housing, and there was no interest.
Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Your Worship. This, I think, is more directed towards staff, but just kind of curious, since it's a condo development and there are condo fees and they're managing their own taxes and roads, are the residents who are going to be living there discounted on their taxes to accommodate the fact that we're not picking it up?
Mr. Montgomery?
Through your worship, I'm actually not sure what the answer to that is. I did live in a townhouse condominium development in Barrie. I don't believe my taxes were discounted. I think I paid for common element fees for snow removal, for example, and I also paid regular taxes based on MPAC's assessment of the property.
Thank you.
Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. My question is with regards to parkland. I know this is a little different development than we would see with detached homes, and it is a small property. How is parkland, access to parkland dealt with this application?
Through your worship to Councillor Ices, there is a piece of parkland across, I mentioned the presentation, it doesn't look like really anything on the screen right now, but there is a municipal park that was conveyed to the municipality on the other side of Ardell Street. The size of it, from what I recall from the Elsemi P3 subdivision, was based on 202 units total for the subdivision. If the unit count drops a bit with these townhouses, there might be a parkland credit that would be required, but we'd have to review that further, and we can certainly report back in any recommendation report on how this application would affect parkland.
Thank you. Councillor Droch.
Through you, Your Worship, did anybody ever think to do a survey for the residents of Lefroy, Bellewart, and extending areas like Churchill, Guildford, to see if that retirement project was wanted?
I'll have to go to staff for that one. Ms. Lee or Mr. Montgomery?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. No, that wasn't something that staff have typically done with applications in terms of the resident survey. I don't believe it was something that was identified to the developer either.
Okay, I was actually more specific to the developer, because you're trying to change something that the residents of Lefroy have slowly but surely come to terms with. So now you're trying to switch it to something other than that. So I just, to involve the residents to try to ease the transition. If you were to try to do something like that, maybe a survey would help, and give you some feedback to see if it's even feasible, give the people a chance to speak.
Thank you. I'm just going to add a little bit to that, Councillor Drudge. So survey, no, but certainly lots of engagement around the official plan in the first place, and our place and the designations to make placemaking in complete communities. So specific to this, no, but I certainly hear your point. Other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Fowler?
With regards to the green space being brought up, the change in the plans, has that increased or decreased the available green space that the residents will have available to them in that particular block?
So through you, Your Worship, to Deputy Mayor Fowler, good question. We have not actually run that calculation, primarily because there was never actually a concept plan prepared for that block, depending on the type of use of what it was going to be. Because again, as I note, the retirement home portion is only one of a number of different permissions. So it could have been commercial, it could have been live work or otherwise. So it depends on which permission you wanted to choose. It would certainly depend on what kind of green space would be available. But as noted, we do have a park on the other side of our dill slated, and then with townhouses, save and except for the back-to-backs, they will have their own yards as well.
Thank you. Other questions from members of council? I had one, Mr. McKinnon, and that was, it's kind of been covered, but I just wanted to note that the current designation and zoning could include seniors apartments up to 4 stories, as well as live-work units, medical clinic, mixed residential commercial buildings, and other uses consistent with the MU4-2 zone, all of which sounds to me like a complete community. So I ask again, if those uses are taken out on this particular block, is there opportunities somewhere else in the LSEMI to provide those necessary uses for a complete community?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's certainly something we can take back and look at.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we'll now hear from members of the public who have questions or comments regarding the proposed amendment. I will first call of those in attendance here at Town Hall to come forward to the podium, and please state your name for the records. As a reminder, every person will have an initial 5 minutes and may return to the podium after everyone has had a first round. Is there anyone here in council chambers who would like to make comment? Please come forward and use the mic and state your name for the record, please, and thanks.
Is it on? Karen Mahoney. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor Fowler, members of council, staff, and tonight's participants. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. My family purchased our property in Lefroy in 1993, which backs onto this location. When we first learned of this development, we were concerned not knowing what it would do to the community. Seeing what the developer proposed and having serious seniors residents located behind us was something that we felt was a reasonable addition to our community. Having options for seniors, which my understanding would also bring some sort of medical building to Lefroy, was beneficial to our town. The developer is now proposing 60 townhouses and back-to-backs with no seniors residents and eliminating the commercial zoning on Killarney Beach Road. With these changes being proposed, I do feel a sense of betrayal. According to More Homes, More Choice, Ontario Housing Supply Action Plan dated May 2019, Minister Clark's 5-point plan emphasizes the need for a variety of different types of housing, and I quote, number 3, mix. Will make it easier to build different types of housings from detached houses and townhomes to mid-rise apartments, second units, and family-sized condos. We need variety. This development was approved to provide a mix of housing, and now we see this application for only one type of housing to be built. The initial plan was approved for 82-unit residential block, and this application reduces the units to 60 townhouse units. Furthermore, the layout of the back-to-backs, there is only one sidewalk around the inside block, which is poor design for pedestrian safety. The block of 8 back-to-backs means only the end units will have windows on 2 sides, which limits natural light and affects well-being. The outside units do not have sidewalks. Everyone must walk on the road to get to a community mailbox. Visitors to residents have to walk on the road from the parking lot. Seniors who have lived in this community for a long time will have no option in staying in the community and made to leave. Mixed housing is important. It allows seniors to stay in the community. It's an opportunity for new families starting out and established families to grow. This development offers no community services or commercial space that would be benefit to the broader community. In closing, I respectfully ask that Council renegotiate a mix of housing more suitable to the community of Lefroy or outright deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mahoney. Is there anyone else who would like to make comment or ask questions of clarification on this application? And we'll ask one more time. Is there anyone who would like to provide comment on the application here for Killarney Beach Road? We'll now go to anyone. Ask the clerks, is there anyone who has signed up to speak virtually to this item?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, we do not have any virtual attendees to this application.
Thank you. And can I ask you also, Madam Clerk, if there's been any comments come in during the time that we've been live streaming?
Thank you, Your Worship. Not with regards to this application.
Thank you. We'll now go to the recommendation to receive the comments provided this evening. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that is on the screen? And that would be Councillor Saunders and Deputy Mayor Fowler. Any further comments and questions for members of Council? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to participate in this presentation regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Anyone who wishes to provide comments may still do so and may also register as an interested party to be contacted before this item is considered by Council. Please contact the Clerk's Office at clerksoffice@innisfil.ca. And Council thanks everyone for their participation. We'll now move on to our second planning application, and I'm afraid I have to go through the same verbiage. The Planning Act is quite prescribed. So our next planning application concerns the Orbit Secondary Plan. We'll first hear from town staff and consultants on behalf of the application. We'll then hear from Council with any questions or comments they may have regarding the application, and then from members of the public, both here in the Council chambers and anyone who is registered to speak virtually. As with the first meeting, speakers will have 5 minutes to ask questions or provide comments. After everyone has had an opportunity, if there's something additional to add, you can come back for a second 5 minutes. We'll now hear from the Town Clerk, Ms. Thoma, on how the public notice of this meeting was provided.
Thank you, Your Worship. Notice for this public meeting was provided to required agencies on February 16th, 2023, and published in the Innisfil Today on February 16th, 2023, and on March 2nd, 2023. Information and materials respecting the secondary plan were also posted on the town's Get Involved page.
Thank you, Ms. Toma. Has any correspondence been received by the Clerk's Department concerning the proposed amendments?
Yes, Your Worship. 3 pieces of correspondence have been received in the clerk's office concerning this application. John Sciveras, dated March 11th, 2023, stating his objection to any further work on the Orbit project until concerns are addressed. From the Simcoe Muskoka Catholic District School Board, dated March 14th, 2023, stating school requirements for this development and requirements may change through refinement of the plan details and future submissions. And from Stephen Kirchenblatt, dated March 14th, 2023, regarding his concerns. As well, Your Worship, members of the public may provide comment or register their interest regarding this application during this meeting or up until Council makes a decision on the application by contacting the clerk's office.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll now hear from Andrea Lee, Director of Planning and Growth, who will provide a high-level summary of the planning context of the proposed amendment, to be followed by David Sajecki of Sajecki Planning, who will provide further planning context to the application.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan and members of council, and good to see the public out for this secondary plan presentation as well. Clerks, I'll get you to go to the next slide. So tonight is a public meeting under the Planning Act specific to the Orbit secondary plan. And what you'll hear us speak to tonight, the OPIP short form. And so before we start, I'll probably explain that's the Orbit Potential and Innovation Plan. So if you hear me say OPIP rather than the whole long name, you'll understand what that relates to. And I'll speak to on a future slide what that contains. The draft Orbit secondary plan document is available on the town website on the Get Involved page, and the entire document is there, and we're going to speak to a number of the principles and policies, both between myself and Mr. Sajecki when he presents later. If we go to the next slide. So just a bit of an introduction. So David Sajecki from Sajecki Planning is going to do the presentation. With him this evening, he does have Dylan Dewsbury from Sajecki Planning, as well as Hart Young from the Weston Williamson team. They're all part of the consulting team that is preparing both the secondary plan and the servicing master plan that make up the OPIP. We're going to talk about the process to date, the context of the Orbit, the draft secondary plan, which is the purpose of tonight, and then what the next steps after tonight's public meeting will be. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a timeline on the process to date. And it did start before the spring, obviously, in terms of the vision of the Orbit and a number of other documents that we'll speak to. But in terms of the public consultation on the secondary plan document and the servicing master plan, that started through an engagement process in the spring of 2022. There were a number of stakeholder meetings and surveys that were conducted with residents and businesses. There were a number of background studies that we're going to speak to that are identified on the website in terms of archaeological and natural heritage and cultural heritage that were completed. And through the summertime, there were a number of community engagement opportunities. There was consultation with our Indigenous communities as well that has been ongoing. There were a number of options in terms of preliminary concepts that were identified through last summer through August. And those were subject to additional stakeholder meetings and additional surveys that continue to be ongoing. There was the first community meeting that was held in October of last year where those concepts were presented and input was sought from the public. And then that resulted in preferred design concepts that were prepared in November. And we did hold a virtual public information session on December 15th of last year. So that's been some of the process to date, which gets us to where we are today. Through January and into February, the finalization of the draft secondary plan policies were established. Those were published on the town website the middle of February when the statutory notice of the secondary plan public meeting went out. So that's kind of where we are today. And in the next steps, we'll talk about where we're going from here in terms of that sort of spring date you see on the timeline. So if we go to the next slide, and actually we'll skip forward to the next one so I can talk about what the OPIP is. And so OPIP is 2 specific documents. the secondary plan, the one you see on the left-hand slide, which is the draft document that is before council for public comment tonight and is posted on the website. And the second component of that is the servicing master plan that looks at identified ways to provide servicing both in the short term to the 2051 planning horizon, but also a strategy to look at the full build-out of the Orbit secondary plan area and how that infrastructure and design would need to be undertaken. The servicing master plan is going through an environmental assessment process, which is running concurrently with this Planning Act process on the secondary plan, but it will be subject to further studies in the future for that longer term strategy as well. So if we go to the next slide, just obviously, probably most people in the room understand the location, but just to put it in context, obviously, Innisfil and the proposed GO station and the Orbit area are located within the provincial growth plan area. So that's one of the planning policy documents that we have to consider that was identified in the staff information report. And obviously, the proposed GO station is on the Barrie to Toronto line, so it is an identified GO station for the future. Next slide, please. So in terms of location, we see sort of the gray area outlines the entire study area of the Orbit secondary plan, and it's sort of founded on the 6th line, and the rail line is where the proposed GO station is, which is kind of the center of that gray area, and it goes as far as the 5th line over to the 7th line and up to the 20th side road. So that's kind of the entire study area, and it comprises about 800 hectares of land. And as we get into the next slide, you'll see on the left-hand area both a yellow and sort of a blue area, and those are two components that are within what was approved by the minister in August of 2021 through a minister's zoning order. And we refer to those as Talk 1 and Talk 2, and those are transit-oriented communities. And Talk 1 is the yellow area, Talk 2 being that sort of blue area around that. Each of those areas through the minister's zoning order has specific density requirements. They're a certain distance from the rail corridor and from the proposed GO station. And they also have specific minimum height requirements for the types of buildings that would occur in those two areas. And those are factored into the secondary plan that is drafted at this point in time. Next slide, please. So I've gone through the process to date, but these are just a few more of the visuals, and some of these do essentially start prior to that April 2022. So there was a partisan's conceptual visual plan of what the Orbit would look like. And that was the basis under which council made decisions previously on their support for the minister's zoning order for Talk 1 and Talk 2 areas. That then established into some discussion papers that were the subject of the stakeholder and business meetings last spring in terms of what were the key themes and the key principles that we wanted to see established through the Orbit study area and through the development of the Orbit. That then led to specific strategies in terms of how do we design this area. And obviously, you see on some of those middle slides, the three in the center, they all have a bit of a radial pattern, and that's as a result of the GO station and trying to have the connectivity and the linkages within those areas. And I'm going to let Mr. Sajecki speak to more of that when he talks about the specifics in the policies. And then we get to the current stage that we're at, which is the conceptual development design that you see in the draft secondary plan document that looks at how the design policies would be implemented and looks at how the population would be attributed over the timeline out to full build out in 2091. It looks at policies in terms of the street and block design, the open space areas, the specifics of the land uses, the height and the densities, as well as the elements within the public realm and the open spaces, the green spaces, the urban design concepts, the focus obviously on active transportation and ultimately transit being a transit-oriented community. So those are all factored into the draft secondary plan. The purpose of tonight is to get public input on that draft document. And when I'll say it again in the next steps, but the intent is those comments would come in. There will be revisions to that document before it's then presented back to council in the future as well. So if we can go to the next slide. So I've spoken to this, but engagement to date has involved a number of stakeholders in addition to the public. It's involved discussions with the County of Simcoe, a number of town departments, many of the Indigenous communities to the area, the Lake Simcoe Conservation Authority, in services, obviously from an infrastructure perspective, landowners within the secondary plan area, all of the school boards, a number of community organizations and social services. The Youth Connects Committee was involved in some of that input last spring and summer as well, and members of the public to date through those various information centers and obviously through tonight's public meeting as well. Next slide. So what we've heard to date, as I indicated, we've got a lot of input that's come through those various surveys, stakeholder engagement sessions, and public information sessions. And there are a number of components that we've heard in terms of recognizing the minister's zoning order, the approved building heights and densities that have been established, the importance of sustainability through the design and development of the secondary plan area, obviously the importance of the connectivity of local transit, both from the transit perspective, but the walkability and openness of this area. And then obviously looking at the ability to accommodate such a large population and density in a reduced area. And it's certainly something that is not characteristic currently of Innisfil, but part of the, and it ties actually to the last bullet point there, is the idea was to have increased density in a smaller area, although it is 800 hectares, allowing for space outside that settlement area to be protected for open space and agricultural areas. So urbanize in certain areas and allow for agriculture to continue outside of those areas. So those are a number of the concepts, and sorry, I did forget the one, my apologies, the impacts on Lake Simcoe, and that's why Lake Simcoe has obviously been involved. The First Nations have been involved in terms of fishing rights, and so looking at the infrastructure and servicing and the development in terms of what are the potential environmental constraints on Lake Simcoe. So that was obviously another area we heard significantly from the public as well. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Sajecki to walk through a number of the secondary plan concepts, principles, and specifics of the policies.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrea. And as Andrea mentioned, my name is David Sajecki. I'm with Sajecki Planning. I'd also like to reiterate what Andrea was saying and thank everyone for attending tonight and taking the time out of your schedule, whether in person or online. We, in addition to the town, obviously, and Sajecki Planning, we're working with Weston Williams and Partners, who have been leading the urban design component of the work, and Hatch, who have been leading the transportation and servicing component of the work. I have a fair bit to go through tonight, so I'll try to do it relatively quickly, but I believe we'll be around to answer questions as well, too. We're very excited about what we're sharing tonight, very excited for the draft of the secondary plan, which entails the vision for orbit to 2091. So do I have control? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this image is the table of contents for the orbit secondary plan. It also is an overview generally of the presentation itself. It includes an introduction to the site, as well as the background and purpose for the secondary plan, the vision, goals, and guiding principles for the development of orbit, both to 2051 and to 2091, a demonstration plan. And when I say demonstration plan, what I mean is it's really one way that the policies, the schedules, and the implementation of the secondary plan can be built out to 2091, showing under these policies, this is one way that the area could look. It's not the plan itself, but provides very strong visuals to see how the plan could be realized. And then Section D are the policies themselves. I won't go through each of them, but I'll speak to them throughout the plan. But they cover everything from sustainability and resiliency to land uses to cultural heritage and to support all of that infrastructure. And then the final section of the secondary plan is implementation, which directs how development within the secondary plan area will be phased and implemented. So next slide, please. This image shows, it's more of a scaled-in version of the secondary plan area. It has a total area of 303 hectares, so just over 300 hectares. To the south, it's generally bound by Fifth Line and Bel Air Road. To the west, it is bound by a boundary set just 300 meters west of 20th Side Road. And to the north, it is bound by 7th Line and the railway corridor and the proposed communities to the east. Along the east side of Orbit, it includes the proposed Sleeping Lion development in a mostly natural area. The site itself is centered, as Andrea mentioned, around Transit-Oriented Community 1, which is the area on this image identified in purple, has a 225-meter radius, generally from the center of 6 Line Road and the Barrie Rail Corridor. And then Transit-Oriented Community 2 is identified in blue, and that has a 425-meter radius from the GO station. So it's the area from 225 meters to 425 meters. And these are the two areas that have a ministerial zoning order covering them. And they also form part of a potential protected major transit station area, as well as a settlement area to 2051. And then finally, the remaining lands are called Transit-Oriented Community 3. And those are lands that will need to be included within the Alcona settlement area prior to development taking place. So next slide, please. I won't read this. I think people can read it for themselves. But this is the vision that was created in 2021 for the Orbit. And the town created this vision in consultation with the community. It was initially based off of the Partisans concept and has led the development of the secondary plan itself. And next slide, please. As part of the building off of the vision are a series of 5 goals. These 5 goals are about what is it that we want to achieve for Orbit. They include first, a sense of place. So that's about developing the framework to create exceptional public spaces, as well as to identify opportunities for placemaking and social interaction. 15-minute neighborhoods. I know there's been a lot of conversation about 15-minute neighborhoods lately, but what they mean, particularly within this context, is walkable, traditional neighborhoods where you can meet all of your daily needs within a 15-minute walk. It includes things such as ensuring within a 15-minute walk there are parks, schools, healthcare facilities, stores, restaurants, sports facilities, but each of these communities are also well connected to other areas within Orbit, as well as the broader town and broader region and county. Higher quality density is one of the goals of Orbit. So there's a saying that it's not necessarily how dense you build it, but how you build it dense. So really thinking about the massing and the location of buildings and how they work at street level. What is the experience people have both within their residences, but also as they're walking through the communities themselves. Preparing an insightful city. So in this context, what an insightful city really means is about how do you make your day-to-day life easier and how do you embrace technology to do that. But as you're embracing technology, ensuring that you're very cognizant of not losing focus on what is good neighborhood design, as well as items such as protecting people's privacy and sharing data. Sustainable community. So obviously central to that is the protection of Lake Simcoe, but it's about more than that. It's about protecting, restoring, and improving the natural environment and minimizing carbon emissions throughout the design of Orbit and the development of Orbit. And next slide, please. Flowing out of these, and I'm not going to speak to these in detail just because of time, but there's a whole section of secondary plan principles. The first principle is really digging into specific areas of sustainability that I'll speak to in the policies. The second one is talking about streets and blocks, looking at walkability, looking at connectivity, ensuring that you're creating blocks that are permeable, that have active frontages. And by active frontages, what I mean are places that are welcoming, that are animated, so you have eyes on the streets, as well as you have access to commercial activities, institutional activities, land uses in built form. So what are the correct land uses for the area? Where should those be located? Public and private space, so exceptional public spaces, but also that the interface between public spaces and private spaces function together within a manner that is really about community building. And then finally, the final principle is mobility. So creating neighborhoods that, of course, there's going to be a place for the private automobile, but also looking at a community that is centered around the GO station. How do we improve connections for people that are walking, for people that are cycling, as well as for people that are taking future transit and accommodating for the automobile as well too. So the next slide is really the demonstration plan that I was speaking to. So it's a vision of how this area, throughout the whole area, can build out. This is a long-term vision, so what you're looking at here is how development within orbit, based on the policies of this plan, could build out to 2051. This is a view looking east towards Lake Simcoe, and the dividing line right through the middle of the site is 6 Line. And then you can see towards, it's centered around the taller buildings is the rail corridor. And then images on the next slide are scaling in more at what development could look like on the left-hand side, right near the GO station itself. So that's looking at a rendering, an artist visual of what a future transit plaza could look like around a GO station. And the image on the right, which is predominant throughout much of the orbit area, is for that vision of a mid-rise development that is sort of in the range of, I guess, 4 to 6, 4 to 8 stories. So next slide, please. These are the key directions that were built out of the demonstration plan. And we use these to, not built out a demonstration plan, sorry, I should say, that provided direction to the demonstration plan. And we use these as direction for developing the policies themselves. So these are really the big moves. One of the key directions is that we have a concentric grid as an organizing geometric principle. What that really means is that we're looking at a traditional grid-shaped development, but we're building that out within a circular structure. So looking at how can we really connect communities, because as you'll see later in the presentation, we envision that there's an opportunity for 4 communities within orbit that form part of the whole of orbit, and how can you connect those through a radial grid. The idea that I spoke to before of 15-minute neighborhoods, so individual neighborhoods that form part of the whole. There's an opportunity for 4 of those within the area. Another key direction is using the GO station as both the area's heart, and then a whole series of green connections that emanate out from that form a spine. So these are really, the idea behind these are green parks that provide opportunities to move throughout orbit, but also opportunities for areas that should really be framed by animated buildings that don't have their backs onto these green spaces. So these can focus as central corridors for community uses, for commercial uses, as well as for areas for people to play and socialize and relax. And then finally, connecting all of that green infrastructure with specific land uses. So looking at how can we leverage these green spaces to really think about where does it make sense, obviously with the GO station, but on these green spaces for a mix of uses, for purely residential uses, and for looking at those community uses as well. So next slide, please. And I'm going to just be speaking to, and I can't go into too many details just because there is so much to cover, but just some of the policies covered in the secondary plan. So very key to the secondary plan is the idea of sustainability and resiliency. So within those, we looked at policies around environmental sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability, energy sustainability and digital innovation. So central to environmental sustainability is the protection of Lake Simcoe. It is identified that provincially significant wetlands cannot be developed. The natural heritage system and natural heritage features must be assessed and protected, and this can be done through environmental site assessments. Impacts on water quality and wetland habitat at Lake Simcoe is directed that those are to form part of the evaluation of redevelopment within orbit, and that all Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority guidelines are applicable and form part of the review by the town and by the Conservation Authority. In terms of social policies, it's really about strengthening social connections and ensuring that places that are built within orbit allow that opportunity for social inclusion and allow that opportunity for accessibility for all residents and all visitors, regardless of your abilities. And next slide, please. This just speaks to some of the economic, energy, and digital innovation policies. One of the energy policies that it speaks to is that development within orbit shall be designed to be able to accommodate a future district energy system. So ensuring that development that goes in can be are required to demonstrate how it could potentially in the future be connected to a district energy system. Not that a district energy system needs to go in day one, but that there is the opportunity for that to occur at some date. And then with regards to digital innovation, it's really about planning for the future, planning for technology, thinking about the concept of the Internet of Things, so how infrastructure will speak to itself in the future. But the other side of that coin is really thinking about what is a responsible data governance system? So what needs to be in place in order to protect for people's privacy and to share data in a responsible manner? Next slide, please. This speaks to the road network as well as streets and blocks within orbit. What you see in the solid orange color, those are existing arterial roads. These are roads that are intended to be major transportation routes, carrying the heavier volumes of traffic throughout orbit. Fifth line is an existing major collector. Major collectors serve mainly as connections of areas that have higher travel demands, traffic and transit services. There are a series of proposed major, minor, and minor collectors throughout orbit, including a major collector transit priority road that I'll show a demonstration cross-section on the next image. But I also want to add that one of the goals, one of the policies without orbit is to build permeable local streets and local blocks. Those aren't identified on this plan specifically because that would come down to the development process itself. But looking for blocks that are more typical of Ontario's old main streets along those local roads, so ones that are of a size and shape that promote walkability. And next slide, please, which does show a demonstration plan of a major collector transit priority road. So this is a road with a 28-meter public right-of-way. It includes 2 traffic lanes for general traffic, in one in either direction, as well as specific lanes for future buses. There's a boulevard for street planting, sidewalks on both sides, and then there's what I like to call I guess an area for setbacks for plazas to accommodate things such as patios and retail spillouts. So next image, please. And this image is going to lead into the land use plan itself, but it denotes the natural heritage system as well as the parks and other open spaces throughout the site. So in totality, it works out to 48% of all lands within orbit are either designated as a public park or open space, or they form part of the natural heritage system. And there's a whole series of policies around how these are to be implemented and protected within the plan. So next slide, please. This slide identifies the land uses themselves. themselves. They range from major transit station mixed-use areas that I'll speak to in a little more detail. That's the area in purple that is really at the heart of orbit, so around the GO station, where the greatest mix of uses and the highest densities are to be located. It includes neighborhood commercial areas, a series of different residential densities from high density to medium densities 1 and 2, down to some small areas of residential low density. There are specific designations around community uses, employment areas, and mixed commercial employment areas, as well as parks and open space and the natural heritage system. Next slide, please. This is an example, and when you go through the draft secondary plan itself, for each land use, there's a bolded section that describes the particular land use, followed by all the permissions for that land use, as well as the purpose for it. So this is just identifying the major transit station mixed-use area, which has a purpose to develop a vibrant town center around the proposed GO station. It's intended to provide for a variety of retail, service, residential, office, institutional, and community uses in a mixed-use pedestrian-friendly setting. And this applies to the lands primarily within TOC1 and TOC2. So next slide, please. This identifies in more details the variety of parks and open spaces throughout the area. So the areas in light purple, those are predominantly natural heritage lands. But aside from that, some of the key concepts around these parks and open spaces is to form that linear form radiating out from the center of the GO station, as well as having concentric circles that connect green spaces throughout orbit. And this follows consistently with the town's parks and open space master plan in terms of the designation of specific parks. And the yellow circles that you see on this plan identify public squares or parkettes. And on the next slide, there are just some images of what the different types of, I guess I would call them typologies within the specific park designations could look like. So in terms of public squares, there are market squares, neighborhood squares, and neighborhood gardens. There's a series of wildlife parks and nature reserves that are connected throughout orbit. And then there are more parks that provide a series of varied activities, very active uses, and those form the civic city parks and urban park typologies throughout orbit. And then on the next slide, if you are looking more specifically at the different precincts within orbit, there are 4 precincts. Those are the station hub, the northwest precinct in green, the southwest precinct in purple, and the southeast precinct in gray, yellow-gray. These are each form those 15-minute neighborhoods that we spoke to, and I'll very briefly go through some of the policies that have been developed for each precinct. So next slide, please. So the Station Hub precinct is generally bounded by Transit-Oriented Community 1 and 2, and this is the area identified in this map on purple. This is smaller than your typical 15-minute neighborhood, as it's probably more like a 5-minute neighborhood, 5 to 10-minute neighborhood. It's around 450 meters from the center of it. This is a central focus of activity within orbit. It includes the greatest building heights, densities, and range of uses. An identifiable character should be established throughout the Station Hub precinct, and it should work consistently and be coordinated well with the proposed GO station and transit plaza. Within the legend, there are primary precinct nodes, secondary precinct nodes, gateways, as well as green corridors. The primary precinct nodes form community hubs, which are centers for retail, but also for community uses. Gateways are really about identifying through use of buildings, through the use of signage when you've arrived at a location, and then the green corridors connect different areas throughout the precinct, sorry. Next slide, please. This is the Northwest Precinct. It's the portion of orbit north of 6th Line and the Station Hub precinct west of the rail corridor. This area is intended to transition downwards in intensity away from the Station Hub precinct, and it will be predominantly a mid-rise community with limited taller buildings close to the Station Hub and along 6th Line. Within this area, there is an employment focus with more dedicated employment lands in other precincts, and those are predominantly along the 6th Line corridor. It has its own gateways as well as its own primary and secondary precinct nodes that serve as areas for local shopping as well as for local community uses such as libraries and schools. The southwest precinct is located just south of 6th Line and north of 5th Line and to the west of the Station Hub precinct. This is an area that, again, transitioned downwards in intensity from the Station Hub. It's predominantly a mid-rise community, has some smaller building heights within it. This is an area that we are encouraging a series of institutional uses with a higher education focus, potential for a healthcare facility and research. And within this area, the directions around it are to establish a character for a modern aesthetic. And next slide, please. Next slide speaks to the southeast precinct. This is an area that is very much predominantly defined by the significant natural heritage features within it. It consists of two sections. There's really the north and south of an existing watercourse. The north section, so closest to the Station Hub, will include the tallest buildings as well as the most intense development. As you move away from 6th Line, the built form intensity and transition decreases, whereas the south section is predominantly a mid-rise moving towards a lower rise towards the outer limits of that precinct. So next slide, please. This slide speaks to the building heights throughout orbit. As I mentioned several times, the tallest building heights are located around the GO station within that Station Hub precinct. Outside of those areas, the built form and building heights are predominantly mid-rise. There are some tall buildings which are identified by the burgundy color that go up to 15 stories, and those are located along 6th Line and the linear corridors. Well, the majority of the lands that are located outside of the Station Hub are between building heights of 2 to 6 stories. So those are denoted by the green building heights on this schedule. Next slide, please. This just speaks to the concept of how height does transition down from TOC1 to TOC2 to TOC3 to the edges of orbit. Within the plan itself, there are a whole series of policies that speak to the design of buildings, whether those are for tall buildings or for mid-rise buildings. It speaks to sustainability, both from a site perspective as well as a building design itself. And it also speaks to design policies around employment lands. So next slide, please. Very important to the growth of orbit is the idea of accommodating housing for a range and mix of housing forms and unit types, including family size units, including within orbit purpose-built rental housing. When it comes to affordable or attainable housing, there is a policy that says orbit shall meet the minimum target set by provincial, county, and town planning authorities. This is for the percentage of new housing units created each year that are to be deemed affordable. There is some flexibility in terms of the definition of that right now to allow for changes to the definition of affordable, which right now the definition is generally around 80% of market value. Next slide, please. This slide speaks to the policies around community services and facilities. On this slide, you can read the list of community services and facilities that are being included within orbit. The focus is to locate these community services and facilities within the primary and secondary nodes to form the heart of each of those 15-minute neighborhoods and precincts. With 2051 as it pertains to school, we've been working with the school boards, and the direction that we have is that there's requirement for 3 elementary schools and 1 secondary school for the Simcoe County District School Board, and 1 elementary school and 1 secondary school for the Simcoe-Muskoka Catholic District School Board. And there are some policies within the plan about where those could be located. Next slide, please. Mobility is another really key concept within Orbit. This speaks to the, not today, so we're speaking about 2091, the modal split target, and that's looking at 40% of trips within Orbit would be taken by the private vehicle, 35% by transit, and 25% by active transportation, meaning walking, cycling, other forms of active movement. Looking at that in terms of a specific target based on distance, when you're very close to the center of orbit, so up to 2 kilometers, you look at a much higher percentage of trips being taken by active transportation, and then as you extend to longer trips, you see a gradual shift towards more private vehicle trips. That is the basis of the transportation plan is built around. So next slide, please. This slide identifies all of the active transportation connections that are proposed throughout Orbit. There's the planned multi-use trail along 6th Line, but then in addition to that, there's a whole series of proposed cycle paths along the green corridors, as well as multi-use paths that are both located along the green corridors and along the rail corridor. And you can just see on the right of this schedule, there's a whole series of images just illustrating what multi-use trails, cycle paths, and pedestrian paths could look like throughout Orbit. So next slide, please. This image speaks to transit, centered around the GO station, but as part of the plan, it speaks to how the area is going to introduce fixed bus route service. So those are services that move towards the GO station, as well as there is a loop that would connect each of the 4 precincts together, that would connect also to those direct diagonal bus routes that would serve the GO station itself. And it might be a little bit hard for people to see on this screen, but there's a whole series of proposed bus stops that are located throughout this schedule as well. Next image, please. So speaking to implementation and phasing, this section of the secondary plan speaks to capital infrastructure improvements, timing, zoning, requirements for development, future studies, and monitoring of the plan. The image on this screen speaks to development to 2051. So these are the lands that are subject to, primarily the lands, I should say. There is the application Sleeping Lion just to the north of it, but the lands that are subject to the ministerial zoning order, these are lands that have statutory or will have statutory authority through the Planning Act, and they fit within the settlement area boundary to 2051. The lands outside of that, so the faded out area, include all of Orbit to 2091. These are not expected to be included within the settlement area boundary that the county is setting to 2051, and would be subject to inclusion through a review of the municipal comprehensive review. And we can go into details about perhaps a definition of what that means later. In terms of on the next slide, the phasing itself, this speaks to the population numbers within the short term, so 0 to 10 years, the medium term, 10 to 28 years, and the long term, 28 to 58 years. So the cumulative population increase, which is the second row, shows within 10 years, you're looking at a population around 9,400. Within 10 to 28 years, so to 2051, the number there is 25,000. And then to full build out, that goes up to 90,000 people. And employment that would be cumulative with that would be a total to 2091 of 20,000 jobs. So it would be the targets for the secondary plan are a population increase of 90,000 and an employment increase of 20,000. over the next, trying to think of what the year is right now, 2023 to 2091. So you're looking at approximately a 70-year timeline. Next slide, please. This speaks to the different capital works that are required for this plan to be able to be built out. Speaks to capital projects in terms of water, wastewater servicing and the timelines for them, but also transit. So the proposed GO station, implementation of and conversion of the on-demand Uber service to a fixed bus route service, speaks to infrastructure in terms of active transportation and the timelines that those would need to be built in, as well as improvements to the existing and proposed road network. And those are continued on the next slide. And I think with that, I may turn it back over to Andrea. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So what's next? And if we go to the next slide, obviously I want to come back to the fact of why we're here tonight. So there's been a lot of information, appreciating that the secondary plan is a very comprehensive document. So we wanted to ensure we walk through some of the concepts, the principles, and the policy framework that's established there. But tonight is to obtain public comments, questions from the public. It is not, I will reiterate what the mayor has said, and I think I've said it once, it is not for decisions tonight. It is an information gathering that will allow the consulting team and town staff to then go back and review the policies, make changes and revise those policies before they are presented to council at a future date for council's consideration of adoption of the secondary plan. And before the question gets asked, I will say no, there isn't a defined timeline. At this point, it will be sometime in the spring, but we don't have a specific council meeting in mind. It'll depend on the comments that come in and the time required to revise the policies. So if we go to the next slide, just a reminder, obviously, people tonight are going to have an opportunity to provide verbal comments. There have been some written comments, and certainly through there still can be submissions that come in online through email or certainly contacting the staff as well to talk about the project. So Mayor Dolan, with that, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee and Mr. Sajecki, for that comprehensive overview. I'll go to members of council and ask if there are questions. Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to beg everyone's indulgence. I've got more than a few questions that have come up during the presentation. I'd just like to get some clarification on, just for those purposes of information. The secondary plan. Now? Does this Talk 1 and Talk 2 inclusive, or is it separate from the MZO in that regard?
Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Fowler. So just so I'm clear, so the MZO applies to Talk 1 and Talk 2 and has specific height and density requirements. They are identified in the secondary plan in terms of some of the policies and the specifics that apply to Talk 1 and Talk 2. And then the secondary plan does focus more on Talk 3, which is the additional lands.
So my understanding is that the secondary plan has very minimal influence over the lands in the MZO that's designated, because I'm just looking for clarification, because we're talking about green space lands and everything else while we're talking about density and height. So are we saying that the MZO supersedes the secondary plan or works in conjunction with? So what power do we have over the development of the specific area in that regard?
Ms. Lee?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor Dolan, to Deputy Mayor Fowler. So the Minister's zoning order is in effect, and it is under the Planning Act. So it applies to the Talk 1 and Talk 2 areas. The secondary plan policies are not in effect at this point in time, so they don't have standing in terms of development applications as they are received for those areas. But certainly they are the principles that council and town staff and the community are looking for. So we're hoping to be able to work with any development applications in Talk 1 and Talk 2, that those principles could still be of sustainability and design and green spaces would still be factored into those applications.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Now, where does Sleeping Lion sit in this? Because I know there's an overlap, and I'm trying to reason out where. if Sleeping Line is part of Talk 1 and Talk 2 in the northeast quadrant, is it not already in play, or is it being adapted to fit under the MZO?
So through you, Mayor Dolan, to Deputy Mayor Fowler. Great question. So Sleeping Lion is a draft plan approved subdivision, and through the process there will be red line revisions to that draft plan as they are associated with the Talk 1 lands to modify the permissions that are already in place for that draft approval for the Talk 1 lands at that higher density, because obviously the density that's identified in the minister's zoning order is not what that draft plan approval provided for, so it has to be modified.
Sorry, I've got a few more here. So when we're talking about the road network major collector, we're referring to Webster, the connecting through between 6th and 7th line. Am I correct in that understanding?
I may look at David to answer that one more specifically. That is correct, then, he's saying.
Through you, Mayor Dolan, to Deputy Mayor Fowler, perhaps we can go back to the road networks schedule. I'm just finding which slide that's on. I think it's probably around slide 24. Slide 24. And you're speaking directly to the major collector transit priority road, or which road in particular?
The green one that comes up to 6th line and crosses over. My understanding of the geography of the region is that is Webster Boulevard as it stands currently. So is it just simply connecting the north and south sections of Webster to create a thoroughfare?
I would not want to use the term thoroughfare. I think that would not be the intention, but it would be there to provide, it's a collector road identified as a major collector, and it would be there to provide connectivity, correct, through 5th line up to 6th line, and then over to the transit, the GO station.
Thank you. With the mid-rises and whatnot that you laid out 3/4 sections, is there a plan to have anyone specifically built first, or is it going to be coming out in a gradual with all 3 at the same time?
Through you, Mayor Dolan, to Deputy Mayor Fowler, that may be a better question for the town to answer. Andrea may be able to handle that one.
And Deputy Mayor, can you just clarify in terms of the density and the height, you're looking at what might be developed first? I just want to make sure I have the question accurate.
Well, in the presentation, there was 3 specific sections surrounding Talk 1 and Talk 2. And for example, the first one is the employment focus, the second one is the aesthetic, the educational, the artistic, the third one is natural heritage. Which one is going to be, is it going to be a gradual increase of each area, or is it going to be one specifically built and then the second specifically built and then the third, or is it going to all grow at once in a general manner with the population?
So what I would say is Mr. Sajecki spoke to the precincts. So obviously the Station Hub precinct, which is essentially your Talk 1, Talk 2 lands, would be the first built. At this point, there hasn't been an indication of whether the Northwest precinct or the Southwest or Southeast would then be, that would be part of the sort of implementation policy in that framework. So it hasn't identified which of those would necessarily occur in the next sequence, but it would be the Station Hub first.
2 more questions and I'm done. Thank you. The 10% currently for affordable housing, we are looking at having that in Talk 1 and Talk 2 primarily. Is that my understanding, or is that something that's going a little further outside that realm?
From my perspective, it would apply to all of the lands. It wouldn't solely be within Talk 1 and Talk 2.
Okay. And lastly, one question. There was reference to fleet on-demand transit system in replacing Uber. However, you referred to it as a bus. So is that a fixed route transit system or a fleet on-demand? I'm getting a little mixed message here, so I just want clarification. Thank you.
So the details on that capital works slide speak to that it would be a fixed route transit system, bus system.
If we can clarify that for the public so that there's no misconceptions about this in the future, it'd be appreciated. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Other questions? Councillor Constantine.
Can I call it 15-minute city, or is that okay? So I would like, is it true that if you live into the 15-minute city, you will be contained? You cannot go in and out without permission? Is that correct?
Who wants
Through
to
you-
take that one?
Through you, Mayor Dolan, to Councillor Constantine, no.
Thank you for clarifying that. We've been hearing a lot about 15-minute cities lately. Councillor Zanella.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm wondering if we have a new timeline for the GO station at this point to be finished, to be built?
So Mayor Dolan, I'll take that question. We do continue to have discussions with Metrolinx. There isn't a firm timeline at this point in time. As we've noted in previous presentations, it's based on the market demand. It's not, obviously construction hasn't started in terms of the GO station, so it's not happening within the next year. It's within, hopefully a couple of years, but no firm date.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'd like to explore is the whole idea that I'm sure a lot of people are sitting here thinking the numbers of people that are going to be living here is kind of astronomical. And is this what we want? Or the growth plan and what's being demanded of us by the province? So if we can just clarify for the audience in terms of the numbers that this part of this new community has to accommodate is not something that Innisfil has control over. So if we could just open that for discussion a little bit in terms of just to clarify, this is not something, this is every community is being asked to accept a certain number in terms of population increase till 2051. So I just wanted to let people know this is not something that that we can say no to. Thank you.
Ms. Lee, can we have MCR 101?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. To Councillor Waters. So to be clear, the municipal comprehensive review that the county completed, and that was done through official plan amendment number 7, it does look at the population allocations to Innisfil and throughout the county to the year 2051. And that's within the current sort of planning horizon, which would be the areas that have been identified as TOC 1 and TOC 2, which are subject to an MZO. But the allocations that have been identified through that MCR for the town of Innisfil go to a population of 83,000 approximately. I'm not gonna, it's 83 and 200 and something. What I will say though is that the minister's zoning order that applies to TOC 1 and TOC 2 is separate from that and is being recognized through the MCR process. It is a major transit station and it has certain minimum density requirements within that area that would go beyond that county 83,000 population. And then the TOC 3 area is not subject to the current county process, and it would be beyond the planning. Both Mr. Sajecki and I have indicated that is beyond the current planning horizon. It's being shown in terms of the future of the area and the strategy, but that is beyond the current provincial planning horizon to 2051.
Thank you. So basically, we're being asked to double our population by 2051, and this development will basically accommodate most of that development plus Alcona North?
So through you, Mayor Dolan, to Councillor Waters, that's correct. Alcona has been identified as the primary settlement area for the town, so that is where the majority of growth should be allocated, and this would accommodate the allocations that have been identified.
And one last question. In the MCR process, Bradford and I think New Temiskaming has about the same population as Innisfil. Do we know what the land requirements, I think our land requirements for 2051 are 104 acres plus 37, I believe. Do we know what Bradford's is, and what are they requesting to accommodate the same population growth to 2051?
So, Councillor Waters, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I can pull up OPA 7 and look at that. What I would say is, without going to the numbers, the amount of land identified in the additional land needs for Innisfil compared to New Tecumseh and Bradford, West Gwillimbury, there was less land required in Innisfil compared to those other two municipalities based on existing designated lands within all of our settlement areas.
I happen to know what the numbers are. So Bradford West Gwillimbury is looking for 450 hectares of property to accommodate another 40,000 people. Innisfil is requesting 104 hectares. So we're requiring 2/3 less land to accommodate the same population. So we've chosen two different visions for our community growth. So I just wanted to give people an idea in terms of, when they see the density in this community, that's the way it is because, we had chosen to go up as opposed to out and become Innisfil as opposed to Mississauga. Thank you.
Thank you. And could I just add, there was job numbers that were attached to that MCR process as well, was there not, Ms. Lee?
That's correct, Mayor Dolan. And so the allocations that have been identified would be in compliance with those employment allocations as well.
Thank you. I had Councillor Saunders, then Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. If I could piggyback a little bit on some of the things that Councillor Waters referred to. The great thing about the higher density is it lets us keep a lot of the spaces of Innisfil rural or agricultural. So we're attempting to create a complete community here where you can get all you need for the basics of life, whether it's the green space, whether it's employment, whether it's shopping, commercial use. There was one thing that I would maybe like to see a little bit more in the planning, and that would be, is there a way that we can incorporate agricultural areas into the green spaces? We all know that the price of food has gone up, and it's been a significant issue for many residents. And as we look out many years from now, I think that will only continue, that we need food sovereignty for our residents. So I see that is mentioned. There's community gardens, there's orchards in there. As we have increased technology, whether it's vertical gardens or greenhouses, gardens on roofs that could produce food for our residents, I'm wondering if we could be a little more intentional in providing spaces for some of those needs that we will have in the future.
So thank you. I made note of those.
Thank you. I saw Ms. Lee writing furiously, so I know she was capturing your comment. Councillor Saunders, did you have something?
Thank you. I have two questions. Thank you, Your Worship. You were talking about schools. You have, I think, 3 or 4 schools planned with 90,000 people. Is that enough? Or do you think it's enough? And are you allocating space for future schools?
Through you, Mayor Dolan, to Councillor Saunders, I think I could have been more clear about that when I was speaking. The 4 to 5 schools that are allocated, those are to 2051, so that's for a population of 25,000 people. To 2091, there will absolutely need to be more schools to accommodate that population. We have included policies around what is required for lands and indicated preferred locations for schools, but at least to this point in the process, the specific properties for those schools have not been identified on the plans.
And just one more question. We were talking about housing. You were talking about families, single families. You weren't talking, there was no inclusion for accessible people, disabled. And the other one you didn't hit on is seniors residence. Is there going to be a seniors residence in this area?
Through you, Mayor Dolan, to Councillor Saunders. That's a great question. I think we'll take that back, and I'll have conversations about that further with Ms. Lee. They are certainly permitted within the land use designations, but we can speak further to that about the need for incorporating seniors residences. One of the items that we're trying to find the correct balance between right now as well too, when it comes to accessibility and other guidelines, is ensuring that the secondary plan works very well with all accompanying documents around just other implementation tools.
Other questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, we'll now hear from members of the public who have questions regarding the proposed amendment. I will first call, and that's questions and comments. We've got, I think we have a list. I'll call on those in attendance first. If you come forward to the podium and state your name and for the record. And as a reminder, I would like to ask respectfully if everyone would take an initial 5 minutes. There's many, many people here. I'm sure many want to speak. We want everyone to have an opportunity. So, and I hate cutting people off. So if you could please respect the 5-minute timeline, and then when you are, if you're not complete and you'd like to come back and add more, you're welcome to come back to the podium again once everyone has had an opportunity. So we'll start with Alex Savigny.
Madam Mayor, members of council, good evening. My name is Alex Savigny. I am a land use planner with Bousfields, Inc. We are a land development and planning consulting firm, and we are also consultants to the Stroud Village Developers Group. So, as you may know, the Stroud Village Developers Group has been very involved in the aforementioned municipal comprehensive review process, and that's included attendance at various public workshops, council meetings. We've made delegations at those meetings to both town and county council. We've also submitted a number of letters stating that, in our opinion, Stroud is a very important settlement area within the town, and that growth, municipal services, and servicing capacity should be allocated to Stroud. So with that being said, I won't take much more of your time. We're here today collectively as kind observers, and we're just excited to learn about other development plans within the town. So with that being said, again, I'll keep it brief. Thank you for your time. Have a great rest of your meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Savigny. Next, and I'd just like to say we have a list of people who had identified that they wanted to speak, but everyone is welcome to speak who wishes to. If you're not on the list, we'll get to you once we've got to the end of the list that's here. Next on the list is Deb Crawford.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor Fowler, members of council, town staff, and tonight's audience. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. To begin, I'd like to focus on the cultural heritage section in the Orbit Secondary Plan document. Page 146 lists the features identified of having heritage recognition. And the following page, Schedule N, there's a map of the area with the features marked. Now, if you don't know the area, there's no direction and no information on what's where. So you're going to be, it'll be tough if you don't know the area. My primary concern, however, is in regard to an item that is called BHR1, which is Built Heritage Resources. It's located on the east side of the GO tracks at the intersection of the 6th line, and it's marked on the map in blue. The property has been designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act since April 2021. It has been, so it's not a surprise to the developer, and it's not a surprise to the proponents, and it shouldn't be a surprise to town staff. Section 14.1.3 lists the cultural heritage aspects and the need to conduct cultural heritage evaluation reports on everything except BHR1. So, although I've asked the question before, I've not had an answer, and I'd really like to know what's happening with that designated house. But before I say that, the question is, maybe a little bit of information. It's a farmhouse. It was constructed in 1867. It has all the classic Georgian elements. It has a 2-story. It's a rectangular brick-shaped main house, 2 sections behind it creating a T. It is a gable roof with decorative brick chimneys at either end. The farmhouse walls are made of 3-course brick construction. Unlike today, when you see a framed wooden house with some bricks slapped around it to create the facade of a brick building, this was made of 3 courses of bricks. The bricks were actually come from the property just a little to the east of that. The red brick exterior is offset by buff-colored bricks on the coins, better known as corners, and a solid band running across and beneath the 2nd-story windows. Bylaw 037-11 provides a detailed description of the property and also lists the interior attributes to be protected under the Ontario Heritage Act. The Sawyer family bought this land in 1853, and it was owned by 4 generations of Sawyers. The Sawyer family blood runs through many settlers and families that built Innisfil and that are still present in Innisfil today. The Ontario Heritage Act describes heritage value in 3 distinct categories: architectural, historical, or historic and contextual. The bylaw designating the Sawyer farmhouse sets out the reasons for designation and identifies all 3 categories as a rationale for designating this property. If you're at all familiar with Bill 23, specifically Section 6, dealing with the Ontario Heritage Act, you may already realize that the legislation now requires a property to meet 2 categories to be eligible for designation. Twice what it used to be, and it's a higher threshold than is known internationally.
Ms. Crawford, you're at about 5:50, so if you could just wrap
quick.
up or come back.
So I'm not talking as fast as I did in my planning. Oh my goodness. So you know what? I'm going to hold there and I'll come back to you.
Thank you so much.
Stay tuned for phase 2.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. And also, if you have written documents, you can provide them to the clerk's office, and they'll make sure every member of council gets a copy as well. But yes, you're welcome to come back for phase 2. Next is Darren Vella from DLR Holdings.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Nice to be here. Would it be possible to put up the implementation slide up on the screen? Don't know the slide number. You're saying no? Not possible?
Through you, Your Worship, is that with the original presentation, and what slide number would that be? And we do have, this is a 5-minute, typically we don't provide presentations unless it's pre-registered to request that. Thank you.
Mr. Vella, I think it probably would take up most of your 5 minutes to find that slide. So maybe we
Okay.
could, if you could
Well,
continue.
I was just going to say, I can sit down and you can pull up the slide and I can come back. That's no problem.
Okay.
So it's just in Mr. Sajeki's presentation, there was a slide titled Implementation. If you could track that down, I'd be more than happy to just sit back and wait, if that's okay, Your
Is it
Worship.
the phasing slide, I think, which is slide 43?
Thanks, Ms. Lee.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. The other problem that we have when we start putting presentation slides up is it becomes problematic with tracking of comments on the presentation through the meeting.
Well, why don't we go on then to Mr. Kirschenblatt, and we'll come back when we can, if we could maybe put the slide up for just a short time and then take it down and allow for the comments to be listed. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. My name is Stephen Kirschenblatt. I've spoken to this council, the previous iteration of this council. Some of you are on it, some of you are new to it. So I am an architect working in this province for 45 years. Our family has property in Innisfil for the past 75 years, and I have a very good understanding of the planning policies and principles and everything that Mr. Sajecki has explained to you all and what he's done. His work is actually very good and very comprehensive. The problem I have with the orbit vision, and I've had it from the beginning, and I've spoken to you all before that we have an OP that was created and adopted in 2018. 2019, the orbit vision appeared, through the mayor and her CAO and others, and it was sort of brought to the previous council and was sort of adopted in principle by the town. The problem I have with this document before you is this document appears to be a total overwrite of the official plan that we all have and we understand. The vision in our official plan now, I'm going to read you what it says. We will manage and plan our growth in a responsible and deliberate way that provides sustainable and timely infrastructure and maintains a strong sense of community, rural character, and small town feel that we value and cherish. The orbit is none of that. The orbit has the potential to totally change the character, if we want to call Alcona Innisfil, or maybe it's really not really Innisfil anymore. Maybe it's just Alcona. I can't decide anymore. But the orbit is a totally inward-looking document. It's a totally inward-looking vision for a small little piece of plot of land that affects a very big community all around it. There is nothing in this document about impact and outreach to the community in terms of social services, community benefits, transportation. There's nothing in this document that even lets anybody here see how they're going to actually park at the GO station, how they can come to the GO station and use the GO station. It's all inward looking. Everybody in the orbit is going to be able to walk to the GO station, but none of the rest of the town is really going to get there. The impact on our road systems is not totally understood. This is a document also that is actually being overlaid on land that is not within a settlement boundary, even in the boundaries that will become in OPA 7. This is a document that overlies non-settlement areas of this town. You can ask Mr. Sajecki. I spoke to Mr. Parkin, but I don't believe Mr. Sajecki's firm has ever done a secondary plan on non-settlement related lands. So is this really a secondary plan? Maybe we should just consider it to be a planning study and a guide to all of us, and something that we can consider and learn its impact and understand it over time. The task at hand is really to deal with the MZO lands that somehow this municipality got the minister to place onto the lands. That is of immediate concern. That is meeting the growth strategies in the MCR and in provincial policies. So we're off the hook for 28 years. Beyond what happens 28 years from now, none of us can tell you what's going to happen to that. Where is the employment that supports the 90,000 people that live on the orbit site? That's not addressed. Is all of a sudden business and employment and industry going to somehow follow the people to the orbit site? Or are really the people on the orbit site all just driving to Alliston and Newmarket and Orillia and all throughout? And the GO train is doing what? The GO train is now, maybe we're all really working from home, and the GO station and the GO line is really totally secondary to our lives anymore, and the impact of it. And everything focused initially on getting a GO station built, that province didn't want to pay for it. We thought we could get developers to pay for it. That has not happened. The mayor promised that to happen before 2022. That did not happen. And this whole orbit idea is very progressive and very looking forward, but is not reality. My firm has drawn probably 10,000, high-rise residential apartment units in the GTA. None of them are family-oriented type units. The cost to build high-density, high-rise is astronomical now. None of it will be affordable. I don't believe this developer group will ever build it. I think this is sort of a play to somehow get this land entrenched in some kind of, status plan under the Planning Act called the secondary plan that will allow them to start picking away at it and add, densities more like you see in Sleepy Lion. The task at hand for all of Innisfil, really, if it wants to be progressive, provide family-oriented housing. Family-oriented housing is not going to be done in a high-rise form, potentially in a mid-rise, but a low to mid-rise form, maybe. Affordable, no underground garage, no cost, no big cost to prepare it. I don't know that any of you really fully understand what is being created by the adoption of this plan. This plan is really great. The plan needs to be put aside, studied, understood, and brought back and really explained to this committee, this community, and understand the total impact on the town.
Thank you, Mr. Kirschenblatt. And you're welcome to come back and talk to us some more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have the implementation plan up? Oh, so while we're waiting, we'll go to the next speaker. Welcome to Innisfil, Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, members of council. First time speaking in Innisfil. My name is Sergio Morales, and as you noted, I'm a city councillor in Barrie and have been since 2014. I'm going to be a little bit different than the previous speaker. And I just want to say thank you to Councillor Richardson. You have incredible social media. That's how I found out about the meeting. And just made a couple notes here. Members of council, staff, you have an opportunity to cement yourselves as innovators in how towns are planned in the future, not just in Canada, I think in the world. And that's really kind of a history you guys have. I don't know too many towns that have made the New York Times. I don't know too many towns that have had the incredible leadership, Mayor Dolan, that you've provided at AMO and other places. And this is what this vision is. And I'm hearing a lot about that there's concerns about how communities grow. That's what Innisfil really is. It's a collection of different towns. Look at Stroud, look at Alcona. If we validated the concerns we have about communities growing the wrong way, Alcona would have never been built in the 80s and 90s. But here we are. It's a proud town. It's a united town, and it's very sustainable. We're not planning towns the way we planned them in the 80s and 90s. We don't have to worry about parking. That's not a priority. We don't have to worry about oversized homes. We have to plan them for the future. Do you really want the future families of Innisfil to worry about where their kids are going to live, or can they afford? Now, while I do understand the concerns about construction costs affecting affordability, the reality is we can't grow in an unsustainable low-density form. And what I've seen in this vision, in this plan, is it has a lot of high-density components, but it also has a lot of components that you find in Cookstown, that you find in Alcona, and that's convenience stores, that's pharmacies, that's walkability. If you think of the rural roots Innisfil has, walkability in communities and a place of community and realm are the fundamentals of strong rural townships. So again, Innisfil is a proud rural district. It's towns within towns. And I think the orbit is definitely going to cement your position as leaders in planning. I'm jealous. I'm jealous Barrie doesn't have this opportunity. And the reality is, I think Councillor Waters alluded to earlier, growth is going to happen. And by the way, when this is done, I'll be 98 years old in 2091. So just for record purposes, lots of time for public consultation and staggering it out. So I'll make sure to eat my veggies and be healthy. But the point is, I'm jealous that my ward district, so for those that don't know, just north of Stroud, we took a little bit of the St. Paul's, their annexation in 2010. I'm jealous that we didn't get an opportunity to grow this way. Because if we had staggered it with community orientation and in this design, I think Southeast Barrie would be a much healthier, better designed place. So you have an opportunity to accept the growth and design it in a sustainable way, or the growth is inevitably going to happen. And as we've seen, the province and I think soon the feds are going to start stepping in and making those decisions for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Morales. Do we have, we do have the implementation up there now. So Mr. Vella, if you wanted to come up and I'll start your 5 minutes over.
Thank you, Worship Members of Council. Good evening. My name is Darren Vella from IPS Consulting. So I'm here this evening on behalf of two property owners that contain lands within the Orbit area. That's DLR Holdings. They're in the southeast corner of the extended Orbit area, TOC3, as well as Alries Developments. They're in the northwest corner. But, Your Worship, I'm also here as a resident of Innisfil. I've lived in Innisfil for quite some time, and I care deeply about this community. So I'm hoping, representing three people, I get 15 minutes? Thought I'd try.
You can come back 3 times.
Fair enough. So I'd like to start off by saying the Orbit plan, further to Councillor Morales, is a bold vision to create a community structure that currently does not exist in Simcoe County or anywhere in Ontario. There are no places like this that we can really rely on to look at as examples in terms of the massing and the overall density that you're proposing through the Orbit plan. Council does need to be aware, though, that the decision you are making is going to create a community with 115,000 people. That is a lot of people to plan for in one secondary plan. I don't think it's ever been done before, personally. First off, Mr. Sejecki's group, I think they've done a great job. I commend them and staff on the ambitious plan and the bold vision. The focus of my comments is why I wanted this slide. It really relates to the timing and implementation of the secondary plan. And how do we get the existing residents that live in Innisfil connected to the Orbit? Look at this slide that we have up on the screen right now. This is a community that is being developed that is completely isolated from Alcona. It is completely isolated from Lefroy. How are we going to get people that live in Innisfil today to use the Orbit? So I'm really hoping that there are opportunities to rethink the overall implementation and phasing strategy that would allow people to access the Orbit area much easier compared to the current proposal. So just in terms of magnitude, another thing that Council should be aware of, the first phase calls for a population of 25,000 people or 5,000 jobs. There was a rendering that was put up in terms of getting an understanding of the overall massing. If we look at some numbers, if every building contains roughly a population of 700 people, that would mean you would need 35 buildings constructed. 35 buildings constructed in order to accommodate the population that's being proposed just in your first phase. So that massing, that overall size, that number of buildings, you can't find that anywhere but downtown Toronto. It doesn't exist in Vaughan. It might exist in Mississauga, but it surely does not exist anywhere in Simcoe County. Is that the right location to put that number of buildings? I would say yes, it is. Should that happen over the next 30 years? It's probably going to take longer than that to even physically construct that number of buildings. High-rise construction is not like building a single-family home. It takes an extensive amount of time. Typically, from start to finish, a high-rise building takes at least 2 years to construct. So we're really looking at a plan that might take longer than the first 2051 to build. And we want the Orbit to be a success. So we really need to think about how are we going to execute the plan in the most responsible way so that there is the ability for all of the residents and the developers and everyone involved to make this a reality. So, unit typology. How much time do I have?
1 minute.
Okay. Unit typology. So in terms of the unit typology for these 35 towers, we really are only talking about one unit type, and that's an apartment or condominium style unit. Does the town currently need 35 buildings of condominium apartment style units? Or should there be a greater diversity of housing units brought into the orbit that's identified in the outer areas in the TOC3 area of the plan? Tall buildings should remain close to the center, but these buildings should be phased differently and will take more time to build. Consider an approach that diversifies the typology of homes being constructed in Innisfil to meet the needs and the varieties of the households that are coming. One of the ideas is to promote the development of parks and trails. As you can see by this image up on the screen as well, there are very few parks within the center of the orbit. And that's because the density is concentrated in the center of the orbit. There's very little green that you can see on this slide. The majority of the green is coming post-2051. So where are these 25,000 people going to enjoy their parks, going to walk on their trails? They're going to be looking at farmland for 30 years before the implementation of these parks and the construction of these parks actually take place. So we think that looking at this a little bit differently through a varying phased approach could help in bringing additional services to not only new residents, but also existing residents. Should I stop there, Your Worship?
If you wouldn't mind.
Okay, I'll be back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Phillip. I believe we've finished our list, but anyone else who is here who would like to speak, please come forward. Welcome, Ms. Sykes, whenever you're ready. Sorry.
Thank you to everyone for listening. I'm going to speak about the elephant in the room, Bill 23. Orbit was planned before Bill 23 came about. Now we're saddled with Bill 23. How is that going to impact us, the residents? From us, the residents, from the council, here, the municipal, the county, the provincial, the federal, we're the taxpayer. If these development charges bounce back, they're going to bounce back on us. And we can't afford that. We're not a rich community. We're a working class community. We have so many people here. I see it every day. I'm in and out the library. The people who are having to use the food bank, the people who are having to pick up something from an empty fridge at the community fridge, the people that are stealing from the community gardens and just completely clearing them out. We're trying to do a good thing and people are stealing from it because there is so much food insecurity. We're talking about affordable housing. The number said 10, this gentleman said 8. The place at the 25th Side Road, there's all kinds of issues with it, and it's a short-term affordability. It's not a full-time, the rest of our life. I grew up in Toronto, and there's Ontario Housing there. Ontario Housing type buildings are not the solution to affordability. A solution to affordability is maybe one unit in a building so that we rise people up, we don't lower them down, so that there's no hope for moving up. I'm concerned about affordability. We can't afford this. And I'm really concerned about who is going to pay for this with these development charges. We need to look at these larger communities that are already there, like Mississauga. Let them be the crash test dummy and see what happens to their taxpayers' dollar base at the end of this. We can't afford to be the crash test dummy on this and end up paying for a rich developer or developers that have deep pockets already. We can't afford to pay their way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sykes. Anyone else who would like to speak, make a comment, ask some questions, please come forward.
No. No, yeah, I thought.
Yeah, sorry. hard to point to people.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to follow on from Councillor Saunders' remarks about accessibility and inclusion, and I was delighted to hear in David's presentation a commitment to that. Perhaps a little less thrilled to hear it related in your response to Councillor Saunders to only seniors, unless I misheard. It really, accessibility is something that affects people of all ages and all kinds of abilities and disabilities, both seen and unseen. So I'm not sure I'm going to get answers to, you're nodding your head, I know you understand. I'm not sure I'm going to get answers to this tonight, but I will be very interested as the infrastructure plan goes forward to see the positioning of things like sewer inverts. Not a very sexy topic, but they completely determine whether or not barrier-free entrance is a possibility. I'm also interested to see, as the discussions progress, how the commitment to accessibility and inclusion is reflected in conversations with builders around the possibility for barrier-free access, homes that are visitable, homes that are adaptable, and in my wildest dreams, even some that are completely accessible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Please come forward, Mr. Rowdy. Mr. Kirschenblatt, when it's your turn, I'll call your name. Ms. Stott.
This is just a quick question. I was just curious to know, how do developers feel about this plan, and will the town be able to hold them to it? In my experience, developers are profit-driven, and how do we ensure that the visions outlined in this plan are actually something that can be fulfilled? That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Stott. I don't know if that's a question that can be answered tonight, Ms. Lee, or did you want to take that one away after we've had more consultation with the proponent?
I think I will do that, Mayor Dolan.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Ratte, and then we have a gentleman over here.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors and staff and members of the audience. My name is Richard Ratte, and I was fortunate enough to sit on the focus group that started the idea originally, and they made a video of our thoughts afterwards. And I've long supported the idea of the orbit because it deals with the problem we faced in Innisfil, which when we moved there in '72, there were wide open spaces from the QE to the 401. And by the time we left in 2008, you could barely see an open field anywhere. And so when they talked to us about the idea of the orbit, it was an idea of trying to incorporate some concepts that are quite readily available in Europe and a way to get the density without using up all the agricultural land. So I've been a supporter of the idea, and I've come to many of the meetings where they talk to the public and get feedback. And I've had some concerns as well, and some of them have been very well articulated tonight. You know, they show us how we're going to get out of the orbit, but they don't show us how we're going to get out to the 400. How many lanes are you going to make wide on the lanes, and how are you going to develop the roads? I hear people concerned about the social impact. I hear lots of concerns about the environment. And someone else brought up tonight a concern that I've thought of is, how does the rest of Innisfil get to use the GO station, never mind the rest of the facilities? So I'll wrap up by saying, in my career, I used to put up buildings for my company, hatcheries and processing plants. And in the development stage, you'd always lay out a plan and you'd review it with the people that were going to have to use the space. And I learned a long time ago that you should pay as much attention to those who support you as to those who are raising concerns. And talk to those people and listen to each concern and see if there's a way with the person who's concerned and the developers and the engineers and the staff. See if there's a way to find a compromise that works and makes it a better plan. And that's the thoughts I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rattay. Please come forward. Welcome to Town Council, and please, if you could state your name for the record.
George Munshaw. I'm a lifer in Innisfil and proud of it. But my biggest question to council is this. What is our quality of life for anybody living in Innisfil below the 20th from the 4th to the 8th for the next 50 years? Well, we have all this construction, all these trucks, all this noise. What was the point of being in Innisfil? A quiet, loving lakeside community. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Munshaw. Next, please come. If we could, anybody who's still interested, maybe make your way down towards the mic, and then we'll. Thank you, sir.
How you doing? Good evening to everybody. Long day at work. So, my name is Troy Curry. I live in Bellewart. My concern is with the orbit is the farmland. When I walk around, people saying hello. Nice community. I moved here 3 years ago. I came here since I was a kid with my father fishing out in Lake Simcoe. Now you're going to bring 90,000 people in, right? There's not going to be hello walking down the street anymore. People walking around their communities. Right? I walk in the woods there, I see deer, I see all kinds of different animals. Now we're going to take it away. That's my opinion. I don't think this is a good idea. I think for growth, yes. Orbit, no. Right? Water, like just your water alone. Like I'm on a well. I know it's going to affect it. They can tell me, and it's not. But I do sewer and water. I do that for a living. It's going to happen. The town of Innisfil is definitely not ready for it. It won't be ready for it for another 80 years for the buildings that they're talking about. You know, my opinion, it's not ready. Maybe down in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Ms. Niles.
Good evening, Your Worship, Mayor Dolan, member of council, and the public. This is a very robust plan, and it's all about the environment. And while it's a good plan, I haven't heard anything about energy efficient homes, which is a big benefactor in terms of using renewable energy, geothermal sources of energy, perhaps solar energy, and that sort of stuff. Also, we are on Lake Simcoe, and thousands of pounds of salt is used on an annual basis to help melt the snow. What plans does the developer have in terms of looking at technology or concepts that are used in Europe to help in that, for our snow, because it does have a phosphorus problem in the lake. So it would be helpful to see a plan that is driven by the environment, at least have a big environmental component when we talk about energy and energy consumption. In Ontario, we use nuclear power. That's a big source of our generation. Most people don't understand when those reactors are taken out, it takes over 3,000 years for them. They're put in sarcophagus, and they're just all over the province. You cannot get rid of the nuclear waste. So we must look at renewable energy. It's the way of the future.
Thank you, Ms. Niles. I want to know if Councillor Waters asked you to say that. He's our renewable energy champion. Anyone else, please come forward.
Hi, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Jeremy Green. I kind of just two things here. I haven't seen anything about tourism. Innisfil is a gateway to a federal waterway, and you have a responsibility to the whole country of Canada to accept tourism and to provide them a way to access Lake Simcoe. Already, I don't see any plans anywhere else in Innisfil to accommodate more tourism. And there's nothing in this plan at all showing anything for tourism. Cookstown needs a way to be connected to this side of the 400 and to be able to use access to the lake throughout the winter for ice activities. They want to be able to take their snowmobile from Cookstown. They should be able to access the lake. So tourism and lake access is a real huge thing. I see multi-use trails, but is that going to include ATVs and snowmobiles year-round? That's kind of one of my biggest concerns about the whole thing and development into the future for the town. The other thing is, we keep hearing from people about this great opportunity that you guys have, a legacy that you guys get to build. But you guys aren't up here to build a legacy. You're here to be a voice for the citizens. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Welcome.
Yeah, to Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members and the general public. I have a quick question. First of all, is the major proponent
Could we just get you to state your name for the record first,
Henry
please?
Koistra, is the major person or corporation behind the Orbit the same organization as Sleeping Lion is now?
Ms. Lee, can you answer that?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. So as I indicated, the entire secondary plan owner, there are multiple landowners within the entire secondary plan area. What we call the Talk 1 and Talk 2 area, which is right around the GO station, is one developer.
Which is the same one?
Which is the Sleeping Lion, correct.
Okay. So if the proponent for the Talk 1 in the immediate area around the GO train station, which is promised if he gets permission to build his city, is the same guy, and they talk about sustainability for the lake and for the good of the lake and the environment. And the sixth line hasn't had the salt and sand cleaned off of it in 3 years in the spring or the summer, and it just keeps building up and building up. I don't see how that's a good corporate citizen, and I would find it very hard to believe that whatever they're going to be doing is good for the town of Innisfil and for us as current residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koistra. Mr. Baker.
Your Worship, Council, and the public. Paul Baker. I wanted to reiterate something somebody said earlier about the sixth line. I think we really need to consider that as part of the orbit, because if it's not properly developed prior to, we'll be living through what we have lived through for a number of years now with Innisfil Beach Line. And I think it's a real shame that we don't plan that first and prepare for the methods in and out of the area before we develop the area itself. And I'd also like to consider, I didn't hear any mention of it, religious institutions within the plan, because they're going to be required by the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Anyone else who would like to speak? Please come forward. Sorry. No rush. I got 5 minutes. I won't start your 5 minutes until you start talking. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. My name's Heather Andrews. I live in Cookstown. So I have been in Innisfil my whole life. And now that we're in Cookstown, how is this going to benefit us, Fred, us taxpayers in Cookstown?
So, yeah, we'll take your questions, but we're just gathering
Okay.
information
Marilyn
tonight.
Dolan, how is that going to help or affect Cookstown?
So
For the orbit.
We'll have that addressed in the report, how it interacts with other places in the village.
Okay, yes. So how is that going to benefit residents of Cookstown?
So you want an answer now, and I'm not a planner, so I'm going to go to Ms. Lee. But as a resident of Cookstown, I can tell you that having the orbit will allow more traditional neighborhoods to stay traditional neighborhoods. The city of Vaughan in 1980, which wasn't that long ago, was 27,000 people.
Right.
Today it's 350.
Right.
And I hope there's nobody from Vaughan here, but I think it's fair to say we don't want to look like Vaughan. So that would be the answer that I would give you, but I'm sure that the planners will have a much more sophisticated answer in the report. So what's happening tonight is all of the comments that are being made, all the questions that are being asked, all of the points that are being made are all being written down, and all of this information will be compiled in a report that will come back to a future meeting, and all of those comments will be addressed at that time.
Okay. Not sure you answered my question, but okay.
I tried. Anyone else? Other questions, comments? Please come forward.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Neeb. You don't have to worry about starting the timer. I'm going to be quick. What I want to mention is nothing new that hasn't already been mentioned by people who are better with their words than I am. But what I haven't seen a lot of in this plan is considerations on tying in transit, as well as the order of development. I think Innisfil is going to look kind of funny if we have TOC 1 and TOC 2 with 40-story buildings and nothing around them. So I'm not looking for any answers tonight. I just want this to be, reiterated as a concern of mine for how this rolls out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else who hasn't had a first turn? Anyone who's indicated virtually that they'd like to speak, Madam Clerk?
Not this evening. Thank you, Your Worship.
Mr. Kirschenblatt, you're back up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think I'd like to just address some of the comments, questions that people have spoken. One lady mentioned, where are the developers? I have been asking all the way through this Orbit Vision, where are the developers? They're not even in this room. Here you are all passing a plan on their land, and they are not even here to speak or comment on it. So I believe what's really been going on is behind closed doors, they have been meeting with all of you. I've been asking to participate in that type of process. I've been asking for a working group form of residents of the town, residents with experience like me, engineers, landscape architects, arborists, environmentalists, to be part of a working group that would really represent all of us in those types of discussions with everybody. We have not been. We've been meeting at presentations by your staff and their consultants at so-called workshops. They're only informative of what they're doing and what they want to do. And really, it's hard for them to really incorporate anything that we want or even to listen to us. That's not their real mandate. So there's no developers. Affordable housing is not going to be, I said it to you before, not going to be built through high-rise concrete. You heard others speak to the cost of building it. It's not going to happen. This gentleman also pointed out that the orbit is sort of starting in the center. So all the cities, if you look at organic growth of most cities, especially North America, start off with this urban sprawl, okay? Because unfortunately, I wanted to live there. I'm a baby boomer. I wanted that type of housing. I think all of you wanted that housing. I think everybody in this room wants all of that urban sprawl housing. As we learned and we developed, we started to realize we stretched the limits of those settlement areas and we filled them up, and we shouldn't go beyond. We can't give up the farmland. We can't invade the natural heritage. And so we held back, and now the cities are all intensifying. You speak about Vaughan as if it's some kind of terrible place, or Mississauga. All the images that are in David Sejecki's study are from Vaughan, from Mississauga, from Toronto. All of those images came from there because those cities are starting to put that density back into the middles of their cities, not in the fringes, centers, strategic centers, everything. So the strategic center that this gentleman is of this site is the orbit. The densities around it, this development group would probably much rather build the low-rise communities all around in the TOC first, but the last thing that they're going to hopefully able to accommodate is the towers and the high density in the center of the town. This plan doesn't contemplate that. You slapped on an MZO onto their land. I don't know why they even wanted it, because they can't build that. And the market is not going to let them build it. And why does Innisfil want to build it when it's all being built down the 400 at Vaughan? You see it in Mississauga. You see it in Markham. You see downtown Toronto with all its towers and its cranes. Why does Innisfil want to build a place like that in this rural community, this place of a collection of little rural communities that we've all really loved, and why we all came here? It's not this town, it's not what we need to provide. And I said it again, what we need to provide is single-family, grade-related housing for young families, places to grow, because you can't get it anymore in Vaughan. You can't get it in Markham. And if we want to do some public good, we do that. Affordable. The only affordable I see ever happening again, and I don't even know that single-family home ownership is even possible anymore with the rising costs of what's happened. $900,000 for a house in Sleeping Lion. Affordability is probably only going to be when a community like Innisfil puts up its land, no development charges, no fees, no taxes, federal government finances and guarantees construction loans only, and nonprofit cooperative housing projects take and provide rental housing at an affordable rent. Maybe there's a plan to that. But nobody is talking about solutions to affordable housing. Everybody's only talking about the need for it. And we need it, and we need it, and we need it, but nobody comes forward with any kind of plans. And the governments need to put their money where their mouth is and provide affordable housing, probably only now through nonprofits. I've done a number of nonprofit housing projects in my career. They're beautiful communities, lots of nice people in it, people that are earning incomes from like $60,000 to $100,000 that are no longer able to buy a single-family home or pay affordable rents, $2,500 for an apartment in Toronto. It's like nuts what's going on, and government is not putting its money where its mouth is to provide affordable housing. So the orbit is, like I said, to Councillor Waters, it is a great golden dream. It's a nice idea. I don't think it's attainable. I don't think the developers are here to work with you to build it. I don't know that anybody really wants it in its form that it is. If we want to designate the boundaries of the settlement area and we want to look at a community that is livable, walkable, somewhat rural, but not overdense, and not putting the pressures on the lake and on the sewage and on the treatment plants and the huge infrastructure costs that you are trying to impose on who? The town? Developers? I don't think so. So I'm not sure where it's all going to come from, and I don't know what the impact is going to be on all of everybody, but it scares the out of me. It's really, really upsetting, and I think you need to just pull back and just study this. Use the document that's been created, that you paid for, and understand all the implications that are around it. Bring the developers into the discussion. Bring them forward. What do they really want to build, and how quickly can they build it? And how can we get the GO station built quickly? It's not going to happen. So it's just all dreaming still. It's still too much dreaming, and it's not reality. We need housing. I think the town, I don't know that anybody in here would object to the boundaries that have been set aside in the total orbit settlement boundary to give up the farmland and provide housing. I don't think we're here to object to that, but it's the housing that is comfortable with this town and this environment without the traffic impacts. One day, everybody's going to be driving electric cars. What is going to be the environmental impact then of electric cars? But we're still going to be driving because there is no alternative. There is no alternative for this place. The employment is not here. Everybody mostly works outside of here. It's a bedroom community to the bigger area around us, and maybe all the way down to the Toronto. I know a lot of people that were taking the GO train all the way to downtown Toronto when they had, when they had to come to work down there. But this is not the plan for this place. It's not really. And I would love to hear from a developer that says, I'm going to build this, I'm going to build it, and I don't know, and I'm going to tell you how. They're not here, and they're not telling us, and I don't know why this council should be speaking for them. Let them speak for themselves. It's their land, and we can comment on their plan. They can pay for the planning consultants, not us. And I think we'll have a better off, much more realistic way to get the GO station built. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirschenblau. I just have one point of clarification. We're not passing any plan here. So tonight, we're not making any decisions. We're not passing any plans. Thank you.
I'm fully aware of that.
Okay, but you did say that. Okay, I'm not going to... Sir, you can wait. You can wait. If you want to do another, after everybody's around, you could do another 5 minutes, but you've had 15 already, so we have to be fair. That's okay. Mr. Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan, members of council. Fear doesn't drive results. Fear drives inaction. And again, I love the comments about connecting trails, connecting Cookstown, ensuring usability, the lake. Those are solid questions because nobody wants to rubber stamp any project that hurts any of the communities. Barrie and Innisfil share the same lake, by the way. And I almost didn't want to come because I don't want people who are very concerned about projects like this to be like, oh, there's a city folk coming here and telling a town what to do. That was a very real concern, but the reality is there was a lot of mistakes Barrie has made historically that you guys as a council, as the representatives of your residents, but as the leaders entrusted with that, have an opportunity to not make again. Here's one example. In the 70s and 80s, Barrie didn't build density. Very few examples of rental towers being built. And therefore, up until about this year, Barrie was one of the top 4, top 5 most expensive places to rent in the entire country. We're talking major urban city nodes. Barrie beat them out in terms of how expensive they were. We didn't build density. Councils in the past said, density's great, rental's great, just not here. Push it somewhere else, do another study. Why didn't we have enough public consultation? The same thing you've heard over and over again. Why is it's not affordable enough? Why don't you do 15%? Developers are greedy. Same things that have been said at council meetings in every municipality that there are public processes. Don't let that be the red herring. So as a result, people in Barrie, their kids, people my age, I'm 29, people who have young families, can't afford. How many doors did I door knock in my community, including St. Paul's, by the way, which used to be part of Innisfil, that said, I'm being rent evicted. My landlord's selling the house. I pay $1,600 a month. I can't afford the new $2,800 prices. These are your residents. So the argument that it's maybe not affordable enough, 10%, they should be doing better. So what's the alternative? You don't do anything? Where are the kids that are growing up in the communities in Innisfil that you door knock doors on? Where's their opportunity to come back and raise a family in Innisfil? They don't have one. There's no supply. They're going to be stuck in basements, maybe illegal and not registered, and you're not going to be able to continue that proud legacy. So just because the percentage isn't good enough, Innisfil and every township and municipality has a responsibility to increase supply. Now, the feds and the province need to do a lot of things, and I agree with the point that city-owned land and town-owned land, there's opportunities to create housing by taking the profit element out, but that doesn't mean you stop the supply of private-built housing. Now, one really good point for current members of council is When you master plan a community like this, it means that down the line, you're going to get less pressures, or whoever takes your spot decades from now, they're going to have less pressures with infill projects. When I drive in Innisfil, I see for sale signs in Stroud. I see for sale sign in Corners in Alcona that say for sale. Do a land assembly to developers. You know, everybody's heard the knock on the door and they're going to throw up a building. Those projects are controversial. They're controversial in Barrie. They're controversial in Innisfil. So if those things already stress you out at planning committee, when you're getting infill projects in established communities, here's an opportunity to push that growth in a centralized master planned area, as kind of Mayor Dolan kind of alluded to protect the established neighborhoods that already exist, because there'll be less incentive and less actually planning justification to do infill development in your existing communities if you get it right and you purpose-built it in a master planned area. So just wanted to provide those comments. And again, the markets in Barrie and Innisfil are definitely interrelated. So think of not just the existing Innisfil residents that are currently active here, but their sons, their daughters, and those that want to continue being able to afford to live in Innisfil and in Simcoe County communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I apologize, Ms. Crawford. I had you on my list and I skipped by you, and please, whenever you're ready.
Oh my gosh, I'm heartbroken you skipped by me. Oh my dear. But you know, it's been really great because now, but I really have to focus now because I've heard so many great comments and I'm thinking, oh, gee, I should come back and talk about that too. But I'll stick to my topic. So quite frankly, and so just to kind of bring that back again, I was talking to you about that Georgian farmhouse. That is listed, not just listed, is designated on Innisfil's Heritage Register, or at least it was yesterday when I checked. And I'm really, I was just going through the changes to the Ontario Heritage Act and how it even meets the threshold of being designated today, in spite of the changes put forward in Bill 23. But I'd also like to point out that at the time it was designated, the property owner did not dispute the designation. He did not dispute the heritage assessment of the property. And in fact, he, as I heard, wanted the property to be a significant addition to his planned 6-line heritage village. Owner of the developer that was previously mentioned and is absent tonight. So moving on, according to the Ontario Heritage Act, Section 29 states the municipality has the ability to approve demolition or removal of a property so designated. The decision rests with the municipality and the decision rests with council. It is my understanding that the Ontario Heritage Act is not trumped by a municipal zoning order. And regardless of any legal maneuvering, I have to ask, is council really going to sit by and allow this structure to be a classic example of demolition by neglect just before and on its way to the local landfill site? Is that the future for this house? I'm not a fan of the planned orbit. I no longer commute to Toronto, but I really wonder when the train is going to stop here. I do think we need to build density, not just townhouses and McMansions, but purpose-built rental units, and I do realize that the Innisfil of the past is not the Innisfil of the future. I also know that Innisfil does not boast striking government buildings. Early township meetings were held in the taverns in Stroud and Lefroy and Churchill. We do not have artfully crafted public buildings to add to our heritage register. It does not have the flash and the prominence of other communities. But it likens me back to the question of what is heritage. And to me, the easiest answer to that is heritage is what we inherit and what we set aside for future generations to inherit. Should we only leave new highways, glass and concrete towers? I do liken back to the stories of the settlers in the early 1800s, when people traveled great distances, brought their families in search of a piece of land that they could call their own, or a safe place where they could raise their families and work towards a piece of land of their own. Not a lot different than today. Is it too much to ask to keep properties like the Sawyer farmhouse as a reminder of where Innisfil has been and what this area represented to the settlers of long ago and to the newcomers of today? I look forward to hearing your answers about the future of the Sawyer farmhouse, and I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. Mr. Vella? Absolutely.
Thank you, Worship. So where I left off, 35 towers to get to 25,000 people, and that you're supposed to build in the next 30 years. So we're a little behind schedule because we were supposed to start in 2021 and we're 2023. And I was talking about park space in the center of the orbit and how important it is for parks and trails, particularly when you're developing vertical communities. That's what we're doing here. We're building communities in the air. And one thing that I think COVID has surely taught us is that people need outdoor space when you're confined within a small area. So condominium units, apartment units, they're relatively smaller in size compared to other housing typologies. It is extremely important that we provide ample park space for people living in these vertical communities. The other thing that I think is important to consider when you're looking at phasing is transportation. So Deputy Mayor Fowler brought up Webster Boulevard, and I think that was something on my talking points. So Webster Boulevard, as it currently sits, is a main road through Alcona. The way the plan and the phasing is currently designed is Webster Boulevard is not going to connect till the 5th line until sometime after 2051. So do we really want to wait 30 years to see Webster Boulevard connected to the 5th line? I would suggest that there's probably a better way to bring that road forward in a quicker timeline. Phasing can be achieved in the orbit area, in my opinion, in a more balanced manner. The plan is designed to grow outward from the GO station, but I think there can also be a parallel development phasing taking place where lands are being developed from the outside in. What that would allow is greater connectivity from your existing community into the orbit, which I think is integral for its overall success. Another thing to consider is we are in the orbit area upstream from many homes that are experiencing serious flooding problems closer to Lake Simcoe. One of my clients' parcels, DLR Holdings, is the key to resolving that downstream flooding issue. We know that the town is working on a drainage plan that is going to bisect through the DLR Holdings parcel in order to stop flooding downstream. We would be more than happy to build that infrastructure at no cost to the town should we be incorporated into the phasing plan for the Orbit project earlier than 2051. We hope that Council will consider an implementation plan that meets the needs of new and existing residents of Innisfil and lends itself to creating complete communities for the benefit of all residents. We feel that the Orbit plan should also be the first priority for the town in considering any settlement area expansion. Councillor Waters spoke to that earlier today, that there's a 2051 target. Councillor Waters, you do have the ability to expand your settlement boundaries by 70 hectares in order to meet your 2051 growth target. that 70 hectares could come from the TOC3 lands in the Orbit area. We feel that that should be a priority for the town, and that would be the most responsible place for additional growth versus additional greenfield development consuming up more farmland and other areas of the municipality. Council and the community continue to work hard on this vision. Like I said earlier, I think it is a good vision. There are good pieces to the Orbit project. Overall, we want this plan, and I think everybody wants this plan to enhance their quality of life for new and existing residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vella. Anyone else? Ms. Sykes?
I'm looking at the infrastructure. To be able to build this, obviously our sewage treatment plant's not going to work, and our water treatment plant's not going to work because they're just going to be overdone. I'm looking at the lake right there. We only get one lake. Once we've destroyed it by whatever we're doing, by over-intensification, our lake is gone. You're never fixing it for generations to come. I'm looking at Barrie, the south end of Barrie. Right now, it's been, what, a year that the 10th line is being closed in McKay and everything because of putting all the infrastructure in? How many years is it going to take for you to do the same thing in this development so that we're going to have to all cut around and go backwards? Like, we already got the veterans closed in the 10th line. And, you know, today I went up Innisfil Beach Road and go past the highway and I got stuck with the traffic. Yeah, that was an inconvenience. But having roads closed and areas closed for years, how do you deal with that? And the gentleman commented about places being built from the outside in instead of the inside out. I raised my family in Brampton. We started in the middle. We worked our way out. And you didn't get to have your stuff put in until everything else was done and caught up with you. Then it stops the people that are living in the middle, not having the construction all the time until it gets to the end, or you're going to be destroying all the roads that you've just built to get to the middle afterwards. So I'm concerned with that. And you know, the lake, it's like the farmland. The farmland's important to me too. That's what our community is. We're rural and we're city, and it meets. And I think we have to balance that. And I don't think the Orbit is balancing that. It's just making this blob in the middle of everywhere, and it's just becoming all about the Orbit. Like, we're all little communities. I think we need to spread out and catch up with the other communities so that it's fair, it doesn't destroy the lake. What we're doing with this great, big, huge blob in the middle of it, I think it's going to impact our lake forever, for generations to come. We're doing the park now, we're doing Innisfil Beach Park, and we're making it for now. What about for the next generations? Like, I'm not going to be, obviously I'm going to be 120 something years old by the time this finished. I don't plan on being around that long. I'm not Hazel McCallion, you know, but it's just, like, it's ridiculous. We have to keep this for our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids. We have to think about that lake. Once it's gone, once it's damaged, there's no bringing it back. We can't fix it. Once we wreck it, it's done.
Thank you, Ms. Sykes. Is there anyone else who would like to say something for a first or a second time? Please come forward.
Good evening, all. Good evening. I want to start off with...
with your name first?
Paul Tricos.
Thank you.
I just recently moved into Innisfil, and it was because my sister-in-law moved in here about 3 years ago. Now, the drive at the time seemed to be a little bit long. So we came up here a couple of times. The scenery is beautiful. Everything is wonderful. We said, we're going to move up here. So we did. Our house got delayed because apparently the sewage treatment plant had to be done first before the rest of and now I live right on 20th and 6th line. So there hasn't been any statement made here about what are we going to do with sewage treatment plants. If you're looking at building 4 or 5 schools, there's going to be at least that much to do with sewage treatment. Now, I work in high-rise residential, and I see buildings being done 2-3 years times. So what you're proposing here, I'm not against. I'm against maybe the high-rise sector of it. I think it should be more flattened out and more diversity brought in and more people looking to buy affordable housing here in Innisfil. Part of the reason I came here was because I'm going to retire hopefully in 10 years. And this is where I wanted to retire. It took me from, I used to live in Vaughan, so I'll advocate to the fact that it took me from 400 to Islington. It used to take me 10 minutes to get home. Then it took me 25. So now it takes me 25 minutes to come up to here, and everything's much better. It's a beautiful town. I don't want to see it get that Innisfil feel be depleted from what it is. Now, the fact that there's probably a lot of people out here, the outdoorsy type, you know, I thought it was great being able to drive a 4x4 on the road. When is that going to get taken out with all this other orbit being put in? Right? Where do we keep that Innisfil feel by doing all these high rises in the center of this orbit? Now, that's my concern because I'm planning to retire here. And I'm sure a lot of people are coming up here because of that feel of being in a rural area and being able to be 5 minutes from the beach. Me and my wife go to the beach every single day, and we didn't even live here at the time. And we came up here to access the beaches. Now, how long is it going to take to get to there now with all this infrastructure being put in place? The other thing is, I mean, my son's coming up here as well. I've got family up here, and everybody's coming up here for the same reason that I came up here for. And I want to see that for a lot of other people, especially this young generation who isn't going to be able to afford that. We got lucky, so we get to move up here. But I see myself right now driving 10 minutes to get to the 400, taking line 6 to 10th and going down, 10 minutes drive. And that's a one-way, either way lane. How am I going to get to the 400 with that proposal being built right there at 20th and 6th line? Right? Those roads have to be opened up way before you decide to do this. Webster has to be opened up, 6th line has to be opened up, maybe even 5th line. There has to be other accesses to 400 because I'm not in that orbit. I'm just outside of that. I'm east of that. So what do I do to get through that traffic in the morning when I got to go to work downtown? Because my work is consistent downtown. I've got an hour drive. But my hour drive coming here is fantastic because I know I'm coming home to Innisfil. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Could we just get the spelling of your last name, please?
T as in Tom, Raikos.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? A first or second time? Okay, Mr. Kirschenblatt, you're going to close us out.
You know, I don't know if they've ever attended a public meeting at council like this before. I think it's great. You know, I like the 5-minute rule. I like the back and forth because as I'm sitting listening to people, it gives me new insight, and I'm hoping you're all listening because I think it's been a great evening, great discussion. But the big picture is that it's a big issue. And I'm a little nervous about the timeline, and I spoke to Ms. Lee last week. We had a really great 1-hour meeting, and there is a timeline in the document that talks about bringing this to council for a decision in the spring. Spring is only 1 week from now. This is a huge matter, and there always seemed to be some urgency to this orbit idea, and I don't see what the urgency is. So we've now I think the town has made a commitment to growth, not population, and I think I've heard 20,000 people till 2051. Is that correct? Is it, sorry? 43?
43,000.
Okay, 43,000. Would the town be prepared to look at an alternate growth, a strategy within the orbit settlement boundaries to accommodate those 43,000 people over the next 28 years? We don't know what the provinces are going to demand of us after 2051. You know, we don't know what the whole state of the world might be. To me, it's a long time horizon. I'm probably not even going to be around. But all the intensification that I see in the city of Toronto and the inner suburbs around it is huge. It's offering everything that a lot of the goals of the orbit are trying to do. They're being implemented in Markham City Centre, in the Vaughan Municipal Centre, Mississauga City Centre. They're all doing the same strategies that are expounded in Mr. Sajecki's planning study. That's, I think he's learned it from there. He's participated in all that. And all he's doing is he's bringing it up here. And I'm saying, why? Why bring it up here? The growth potential down there is great. What we want here is sort of to maintain this rural community that our official plan speaks of, why most of us have come up here, why I'm a lot closer to retirement than the previous gentleman is, and I would like to retire here. So we need to slow down. We need to come up with a plan. If the plan and the commitment from the council is to add a population density of 43,000 over the next 28 years, is the town open to an alternate vision, an alternate plan, working with Mr. Sajecki or others and trying to develop that with the community, with the developers in the room, and a properly run process? Because this process, I think, has been flawed, and I think it's resulted in too scary, a vision of what could happen and too big of a change for what the nature and the character of this place is. And then, and just in last, this affordability issue is killing me, okay? I learned in school when I was like 40, 50 years ago that architects could save the world, okay? That somehow, it was responsibility of architects to save the world. This affordable housing issue is gnawing at me. It's one thing that I could never, ever convince any of my developer clients to incorporate into any of their projects on any of their sites. The profit-driven, the costs of everything, everything was rising a lot faster than our wages have been rising. Affordability, I just don't have an answer unless government participates fully and completely in solving the problem. But, I looked at a site on Innisfil Beach Road for development right beside the Sobeys, just east of it. There's a nice property. It's a nice infill site on our main street. $15 million for that site. Talk about affordability. I don't think it's happening. And I don't know that this developer group anywhere on this site is going to put their land up for free to create anywhere near affordability in anything they do. But, we can dream about it, but I think there's got to be better discussion of affordability. There's discussions about parkland and connectivity and the impact on the lake. The plan somehow draws itself down to the lake. It almost runs down to Maple Road, right to the back, including some of the houses that are on the opposite side from the lake on that street. It wants to reach out to the lake, because that's what its big attraction needs to be. And the connection to the lake is not being addressed. The impact of 90,000 people on the lake. I came to a public meeting on the Orbit early on. Maybe you all recall it, about that nice little 4-story development around the Heritage House beside Alcona Glen. Great little infill project. It still hasn't somehow gotten there. But one of the councillors said, well, look, we're going to add another 125 units there. Where are all these people going to go? To Innisfil Beach Park? There's no room for them.
Mr.
Park is
Kirschenblatt,
not big enough. I don't think anybody else wants to talk about it.
No, we just want to focus on the subject of tonight's,
the reality is there's no park. The connection to the lake is great. 90,000 people are not going to be accommodated in Innisfil Beach Park. There's lots of gaps and lots of holes in the plan. We need to slow down. We need to see. And I'm asking you, Madam Mayor, are you prepared to look at an alternate plan to this plan?
Mr. Kirschenblatt, me as a mayor, and I wanted to say earlier when you talked about me promising when the GO train station, I would never dare to promise anything. I'm one of 9 people, and whatever this council decides, I will support. So it's up to council. It's not up to the mayor. We still live in a democracy here.
You addressed me, I like to respond.
Thank you.
Okay, can I respond?
Um,
You addressed me.
1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute, and then we got to move on.
On that topic. So I'll address that last question, not just to the mayor, but to all of you. Are you prepared to look at an alternate plan to accommodate 43,000 people within the Orbit settlement boundary, not just adopting this plan because it happens to be done in here?
Thank you.
You don't have to answer today.
No, we won't do that. We're here tonight to gather input. It would be inappropriate for us to come here with our mind made up before we heard from all of you, and that's what we have done. And I want to thank everybody for their passion for Innisfil. It's wonderful to get all of us in a room and just talk about how much we love. We might have different visions going forward, but it's obvious to me that everybody who sat through all this cares very deeply about Innisfil, as we do at the table. And I also want to tell all of you that you have more opportunity. And once you go home and all of this starts percolating through your mind and you think of other things and you're talking to your neighbors, make a point of writing an email, sending it in to the planning staff. There's lots of opportunity after this time. If you're not like crazy about getting up and standing in front of a mic, but you really want to share, please do. We're still open to that. I'll just go to Madam Clerk to see if there's any more people who are watching virtually who have any comments.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have not received any additional comments this evening.
Thank you. So we will now go to the recommendation to receive the comments provided this evening. Can I please have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that is on the screen? Councillor Zanella and Councillor Waters. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. I want to thank everyone tremendously who has taken the time to participate in this meeting. Anyone who wishes to provide comments may do so and may also register as an interested party. If you register as an interested party, when you come back, you can listen to us talk and answer some of the questions that you've asked us. So you can register that. You can be contacted before this item is considered by council. So please contact clerk's office at innisfil.ca. All one word, clerk's office at innisfil.ca. Council thanks everyone for their participation, and we will now go to the confirming bylaw, and then we'll move for adjournment. So the confirming bylaw is moved by Deputy Mayor Fowler, seconded by Councillor Saunders. All those in favor? That's carried. And move to adjourn. That's not 8:36, that's 9:36. Moved by Councillor Richardson, seconded by Councillor Drodge. I don't think there'll be anyone opposing this motion. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Council.